Welcome back to another story on No Harry. This time, we're bringing you, what if the Sorting Hat refused every house and declared Harry too powerful for student status, in front of everyone. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Hat refuses. The candles floated like they'd always floated, like they would always float, burning without dripping in the cool September air above 4 long tables packed with students who had been waiting all summer for this exact moment. The ceiling showed a sky thick with clouds, the stars smothered behind them, and the ghosts drifted along the edges of the hall in their usual formations, nearly headless Nick near Gryffindor, the fat friar beaming at Hufflepuff, the bloody Baron standing perfectly still near Slytherin like a man who had learned that stillness was its own kind of threat. Harry Potter walked in with the other first years and did not feel magical at all. He felt damp. The boat ride across the lake had been cold and the mist had settled into his hair, and his second-hand robes were slightly too large at the shoulders and slightly too short at the wrists, and the boy beside him, Ron Weasley, who had been on the train and who was already becoming something like a friend, kept muttering that he thought he was going to be sick. Harry thought that was fair. He might be sick too. He couldn't be sure. The Great Hall was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen, and he had spent 11 years seeing almost nothing, so that was saying something. He turned his head slowly, taking it in, the hundreds of faces watching them, the candles, the tables, the high ceiling that wasn't a ceiling, the sheer size of it all, and he felt something tighten in his chest that wasn't fear exactly. More like recognition. Like somewhere underneath all the years in the cupboard and all the years of being told he was nothing, some part of him had known that rooms like this existed and had been waiting for him to find one. He didn't realize he'd stopped walking until Ron nudged him from behind. "Keep moving," Ron whispered. "McGonagall looks like she'll transfigure us into something embarrassing." Professor McGonagall was, indeed, watching them with the particular expression of a woman who had herded first years for 30 years and had run entirely out of patience with the ones who stopped to stare. Harry moved. They lined up in front of the teacher's table, facing the student body, and Harry counted the tables automatically, one for each house. He knew that much from Ron's explanations on the train, and looked at the faces looking back at him. Some curious, some bored, some openly evaluating. A blond boy near the Slytherin table was staring at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. Something between hunger and hostility, like he'd already decided something and was waiting for the world to agree. At the front of the room, a stool held a very old, very patched hat. It was unremarkable. It was the most unremarkable thing in the room, which was full of floating candles and transparent ghosts, and Harry found himself almost amused by that. A hat. The whole thing came down to a hat. McGonagall unrolled a scroll. "When I call your name," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the murmur of the hall, "you will come forward, place the hat on your head, and be sorted into your house." Simple enough. Harry had listened to Ron on the train and had his own private hopes. Gryffindor seemed like the obvious choice, and not just because of Ron's family. Something about the description of it felt right in a way he couldn't articulate. Brave. Daring. Nerve. He'd never been allowed to call himself any of those things, but standing here in this hall, he thought maybe he could learn to. The sorting began. Hannah Abbott went to Hufflepuff. Susan Bones followed. Then a boy named Terry Boot to Ravenclaw, and a girl named Lavender Brown to Gryffindor, and Harry watched each one walk up to the stool with the hat drooping over their ears and then walk away to their tables with expressions ranging from pure relief to absolute delight. Ron was watching too, his expression tight with the nerves he was trying to hide beneath a very convincing impression of calm. Hermione Granger. The girl who'd found them in their train compartment, the one with the bushy hair and the very quick voice and the look of someone who had prepared for every possible scenario. Harry had liked her immediately, which surprised him, because she was a bit much, walked up and put the hat on her head and it immediately shouted, "Gryffindor," before it was even fully settled. Hermione walked to the Gryffindor table looking like she'd expected nothing less, which Harry suspected she hadn't. More names. More students. The hall was filling up with small victories and the sound of enthusiastic table thumping, and Harry watched and waited and found, as the names worked their way through the alphabet, that the tightness in his chest was growing. Neville Longbottom. A round-faced boy who had lost his toad twice already that evening shuffled up and sat beneath the hat for nearly 4 minutes before it finally called, Gryffindor, in a voice that suggested it had needed to think about it. Neville looked stunned. He walked to the table in something of a daze, leaving the hat sitting slightly askew on the stool. Then, Draco Malfoy. The blond boy strode up like he owned the space between the stool and the teacher's table. He sat. The hat touched his head. Barely a second passed. Slytherin. Malfoy smiled like he'd been told something about himself that confirmed everything he'd always thought. He walked to his table with his chin up and his hands loose at his sides, and Harry watched him and thought, that boy is very sure of himself. He wasn't sure if that was admirable or troubling. Possibly both. More names. More houses. And then McGonagall reached the end of her scroll, paused the way people pause when they're not sure they've read something correctly, and said, Harry Potter. The silence that followed was extraordinary. Not the polite, expectant silence of the previous sortings but something thicker, a held breath, a collective turning, every face in the hall swiveling toward the line of first years with an intensity that was almost physical. People were whispering. Harry could hear fragments of it. The Harry Potter? Is that him? Where's his scar? Harry walked up to the stool. He was aware of the eyes but he didn't perform for them. He just walked, the way he'd always walked through the Dursleys' house, quietly, steadily, not making more of himself than the space required. He sat down on the stool, which was three-legged and slightly uneven, and reached up and put the hat on his head. Darkness dropped over his eyes. The hat settled down over his ears. And then something happened that Harry had not been prepared for. The hat didn't speak to him. Not in words, not at first. What he felt was more like pressure. Like standing at the edge of something very deep and having the depth press back against you. Like the hat was reaching in and finding far more than it had expected and was now, very quietly, trying to work out what to do about that. Interesting, something said, inside his skull, in a voice that sounded like old paper and dry stone. Very interesting. Well. Harry thought at it. He wasn't sure if that was how it worked but it seemed rude not to respond. You're thinking, the hat said, and there was something in its tone that Harry couldn't identify. That's good. Most of them aren't, at this stage. Too frightened. But you're curious. You want to know what I am. Aren't you just a hat? I am a consciousness imprinted on fabric by a man who has been dead for 1,000 years, the hat said. Whether that constitutes just anything is a matter of considerable philosophical debate. Okay, Harry said. So where do I go? The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a very old, very experienced thing encountering a problem it had not previously encountered. Harry felt the hat moving through him, not unpleasantly, but thoroughly, the way fingers move through a card file looking for something specific and finding, instead, an entire archive. It went through the obvious things first, his bravery, considerable, his loyalty, fierce, somewhat surprised by itself, his intelligence, sharp and practical rather than academic, his ambition, present, but pointed sideways, toward something the hat couldn't immediately name. Then it went deeper. Harry felt it when the hat stopped. It stopped the way a person stops when they've walked into a room they didn't expect to find, still, suddenly, the forward motion arrested by something that demanded attention. The hat sat in that stillness for what felt like a long time. Harry waited. Outside in the hall, he could dimly hear the murmur of students growing curious, could feel the physical awareness of time passing, of this taking longer than normal. I see, the hat said, finally. Its voice had changed. It was slower now. More careful. I have sorted 4,312 students in the course of my existence, it said. I have sorted the brilliant and the terrible and the mediocre and the marvelous. I have sorted students who were, in their own ways, extraordinary, who became heads of departments and champions of their age and ministers of magic. I have made difficult choices. I have made choices I was later told were wrong, and I maintain they were right, because I understand people in a way people rarely understand themselves. Harry waited. But I have never, the Hat said, encountered this. Encountered what? Harry asked. Something I cannot sort. The words landed in Harry's head with a kind of quiet weight. He turned them over. I don't understand. The 4 houses were built on 4 principles, the Hat said, and now it sounded almost urgent. Salazar valued blood and ambition and cunning. Helga valued hard work and patience and fairness. Rowena valued intelligence and creativity and wit. Godric valued courage and daring and nerve. Each of these principles attracts certain kinds of magic. Certain kinds of people. I have spent 1,000 years learning to read those kinds. I am very good at it. But you, the Hat said, are not one kind. I'm all 4. Harry guessed. No, the Hat said, firmly. You are not 4 things. You are something else entirely. Something the 4 founders did not account for, because it was not supposed to exist. Or at least, a pause, long and considering, it was not supposed to exist in a first-year student. The frameworks they built, Gryffindor's courage, Slytherin's power, Ravenclaw's mind, Hufflepuff's heart, are components. Pieces of a greater whole. You are the whole. And I cannot put the whole into one of its own parts without what? The Hat's silence was almost pained. Without lying, it said. And I do not lie. I am constitutionally incapable of it. It is the only thing Salazar and Godric agreed on when they made me. I must speak the truth of what I see. And the truth of what I see is this, Harry James Potter, you are too powerful for student classification. Harry sat very still. What does that mean, exactly? I genuinely don't know, the Hat said. I've been alive for 1,000 years and I don't know. That should tell you something. And then the Hat, which had been keeping its voice between itself and Harry, did something that Harry would later learn it had never done in its entire millennium of existence. It spoke aloud. The great hall heard it the way you hear a thunderclap, the sound arriving before the comprehension does, the brain scrambling to catch up with something that didn't fit the expected pattern. The Hat's voice rang out clear and strange and utterly calm, the voice of something that had decided that the truth was more important than comfort. I cannot sort this student. The murmuring stopped. Every head turned. McGonagall's eyes snapped to the stool. I have searched this student as I have searched every student in 4,000 years of service to this school, the Hat continued, and I cannot place him. Not because he lacks the qualities of any house, but because he exceeds the framework that the houses were designed to assess. Harry James Potter is too powerful for student classification. I will not place him in a house and call it sorting. What I would be doing is diminishing. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. He couldn't see anything, the Hat was still over his eyes, but he could feel the room. 400 people drawing breath at the same moment. The collective recalibration of an entire institution encountering a sentence it had no category for. He heard a chair scrape back somewhere at the teacher's table. He heard the fat friar say, "Well, I never," in a tone of genuine wonder. He heard, from somewhere near Slytherin, Draco Malfoy's sharp, incredulous laugh, which was quickly smothered by something, embarrassment, maybe, or the intervention of a nearby upperclassman. Harry reached up and lifted the hat off his head. He looked out at the hall and the hall looked back at him. He had expected, he didn't know. Awe, perhaps, or something cinematic. What he actually saw was 400 students who had just been told something they had no idea what to do with, and were therefore doing what people always do when they have no idea, staring. Waiting for someone else to react first. The faces were a taxonomy of shock, the wide eyes of the Hufflepuff table, the sharp calculating look that moved through Ravenclaw like a wave, the muted outrage visible in Slytherin's perfectly composed faces. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione Granger was gripping her spoon with both hands and staring at Harry with an expression that was 2/3 fascination and 1/3 offense, as though the hat's declaration had personally disrupted her worldview. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore was very still. Harry had not met Dumbledore yet, had seen his picture, knew who he was, had assembled a rough impression from Ron's descriptions, but even at this distance, even at 11 years old with no real frame of reference, Harry could see that Dumbledore being very still was different from Dumbledore being calm. A man who was calm in a crisis looked like someone who had prepared for it. Dumbledore looked like a man who had prepared for everything except this. McGonagall stepped forward. She was remarkably composed, given that her composure was clearly performing significant structural work. "Potter," she said. "You may step down." Harry stepped down from the stool. He held the hat out to her. She took it. Looked at it. Looked at him. Her jaw was doing something complicated. "You may, stand to the side, for the moment," she said. "I will, we will," she stopped. Collected herself. Cleared her throat. "I will see to you after the remaining students are sorted." The remaining students were sorted in record time. Harry stood at the edge of the staff table and watched them, and they watched him sideways, the way you watch something that might be dangerous or might be miraculous and you haven't yet worked out which. 2 boys tripped walking to the stool. 1 girl sat down and immediately said, "Hufflepuff, please," to the hat in a small, fervent voice before it had even touched her head, as though she just wanted the whole thing to be normal again. Ron Weasley was sorted into Gryffindor to the enormous enthusiasm of what appeared to be 4 older Weasley brothers, who broke into immediate applause. Ron walked to his table with a grin so wide it was basically its own announcement. He turned to find Harry's eye in the crowd, spotted him standing alone at the edge of the teacher's table, and his expression went from joy to something softer and more complicated, a kind of solidarity that Harry hadn't asked for but that landed in his chest like something solid and warm. The last student was sorted. McGonagall rolled her scroll. Dumbledore rose from his chair and the hall settled. He looked, Harry thought, like someone who had decided in the last 2 minutes exactly what to say and how to say it. His face was arranged into something that was wise and warm and very, very careful. "Welcome," Dumbledore said, his voice filling the hall without effort, the way voices do when they've filled rooms for many decades, to another year at Hogwarts. As always, the beginning of term brings new faces and new possibilities. His eyes moved briefly, deliberately, to Harry, and moved away, and occasionally, new and extraordinary circumstances that remind us all why learning never truly ends. "I ask that all students approach this year with their characteristic grace, their characteristic curiosity, and their characteristic discretion." He said the last word lightly, but the emphasis was there for anyone listening. "And now, let the feast begin." The tables erupted with food and the hall erupted with conversation, and Harry stood at the edge of it all, neither sorted nor seated, holding no plate, belonging to no table, and thought, well, this is something. McGonagall materialized beside him with the silent efficiency of someone who had been teaching for 30 years and had gotten very good at appearing exactly where she was needed. She guided him out of the main hall through a side door, up a short staircase, into a small room off the corridor where a single chair sat next to a fireplace that was already lit. She closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Harry looked at the fire. McGonagall looked at Harry. "Are you all right?" she said, finally, and her voice had lost the precision of the public-facing McGonagall and replaced it with something more direct. "Yes," Harry said. "Then, honestly, I think so." It was loud. When the hat said it. It was, McGonagall agreed. She sat down in the chair across from him with the careful movements of someone controlling her reaction. "I want you to know, Mr. Potter, that this has never happened before. The hat told me that." "What else did the hat tell you?" Harry considered the question and gave her a straight answer, because she seemed like a woman who deserved those. He told her what the hat had said, not all of it, but the substance of it. Too powerful for student classification. The framework of the houses being insufficient. The hat's inability to diminish. McGonagall listened without interrupting, which Harry noted, and which he appreciated. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what that means?" she asked. "For your time here?" "Not yet," Harry said. "Do you?" She pressed her lips together. "No," she said. "I don't. The headmaster will want to speak with you tonight, and I expect there will be discussions, at the staff level, about how best to proceed. You will be given accommodations in the meantime. We have a suite of rooms in the East Tower that has been unused for some years. You'll find it's been prepared. I've arranged for your trunk to be brought up." Harry looked at her. "My own tower?" "Your own rooms within a tower, yes." He sat with that for a second. After 11 years in a cupboard under the stairs, and then a slightly larger room with a cat flap on the door, the idea of having an entire tower of rooms was so strange he couldn't hold the shape of it properly. "Right," he said. "You'll attend classes normally," McGonagall continued. "You'll be assessed in the usual way. You will sit with, she stopped. Started again. "The matter of mealtimes and house points and house association will be addressed by the headmaster. Until such a determination is made, you will dine at the teacher's table." "I'd rather not," Harry said. McGonagall blinked. "I beg your pardon." "At the teacher's table." Harry looked at her steadily. "I'd rather sit with the students. With Ron, with Weasley. And Hermione Granger. If that's possible." McGonagall held his gaze for a moment that stretched. "It is not traditionally, I'm apparently not traditional," Harry said. It came out more direct than he'd intended, not rude, just plain. "And I think being separated from everyone is probably going to make things worse, not better. For me and for everyone who's now wondering what to do with me." McGonagall looked at him for a long, assessing moment. Harry had the distinct impression she was recalibrating something. "I'll speak with the headmaster," she said. "Thank you." She rose and moved to the door, then paused. "Mr. Potter," she said, without turning. "You are quite self-possessed, for an 11-year-old who has just been publicly declared extraordinary." "I grew up being told I was nothing," Harry said. "I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle." McGonagall was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "I think perhaps not," and left. Dumbledore came for him 20 minutes later. Harry heard the footsteps first, unhurried, deliberate, and then the door opened and the headmaster of Hogwarts settled into the chair McGonagall had vacated with the ease of a man settling into his own life. His eyes were very blue and very alert, and they settled on Harry with an attention that was, Harry thought, possibly the most concentrated form of attention he had ever been subjected to. It felt like being read. Harry looked back. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm. It was very deliberately warm, Harry noticed, the warmth of a man who understood the power of warmth and used it consciously. "I suspect this has been an unusual evening." "Most of my evenings aren't like this," Harry confirmed. Dumbledore smiled, and Harry thought, that smile is real. It didn't reach his eyes exactly, but it came from somewhere genuine, which was different from the warmth of his voice, which came from somewhere more calculating. Harry filed that away. "I want you to know," Dumbledore said, leaning back slightly in his chair and folding his hands, "that whatever the hat declared tonight, you are welcome here. Hogwarts is your home, and it will remain so." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore paused, just barely. "Good," he said. "I also want you to know that what happened tonight is unprecedented. In 1,000 years of the Sorting Hats operation, it has never refused to sort a student. It has deliberated. It has taken its time. But it has never declined." He looked at Harry with that precise attention. "I wonder if you have any sense of why." Harry considered the question carefully, the way the hat had considered him. It said the houses were built to assess certain types of people, he said. And that I didn't fit a type. That putting me in one house would be lying. Yes, Dumbledore said. That is the hat's perspective. He paused. It is a perspective I have been considering since the moment I heard it spoken aloud. And? Harry said. Dumbledore smiled again, the same complicated smile. And I find myself thinking about a river, he said. A river that runs through 4 fields. Each field is made richer for the river's passing. But the river does not belong to any of the fields. It belongs to itself. Its nature. He looked at Harry. Do you understand what I'm suggesting? That I'm a river, Harry said. That you might be something which flows through categories rather than being contained by them. Dumbledore's voice was very gentle. That this needn't be frightening. It isn't frightening, Harry said. And there it was again, that pause. Barely there. A man recalibrating. No, Dumbledore said. I can see that. He was quiet for a moment, his fingers interlaced, looking at Harry with something that was more complex than simple warmth. I want to guide you, he said, and the honesty of it was startling, the directness of a man who had decided that honesty was strategically useful here, which was different from the honesty of someone who simply was honest. I want to ensure that your year here is productive and safe, and I'd like to sit with my friends, Harry said. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. At the Gryffindor table, if possible. And attend classes normally. And be left alone to figure things out in the way that feels right to me. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I think that would be more productive than anything else. Dumbledore held the gaze. And for a moment, just a moment, something moved in those very blue eyes that was not warmth or calculation or wisdom. It was surprise. Real, clean, unmanaged surprise, the kind that happens when a person behaves completely contrary to your model of them. Then Dumbledore smiled, and it was the most genuine smile Harry had yet seen on his face. Very well, Harry, he said. The Gryffindor table it is. I'll arrange a seat. Thank you, Harry said. The East Tower had 3 rooms, a bedroom, a small study, and a sitting room with a window seat that looked out over the lake. Harry's trunk had been brought up, and a fire had been lit, and there was a plate of sandwiches on the desk that he suspected McGonagall had arranged because she was fundamentally a woman who responded to stress by making sure people were fed. He sat in the window seat and looked out at the lake for a long time. The water was dark and still and very deep, and somewhere beneath it the giant squid moved through its own alien life, indifferent to houses and hats and the declarations of old enchanted objects. Harry pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The hat had called him too powerful for student classification, and the entire hall had heard it, and now 400 people were lying in their dormitories processing that information and deciding what to do with it. Some of them would be afraid. Some would be resentful. Some, the Ravenclaws, he suspected, and Hermione Granger, would be furiously curious. Draco Malfoy, he thought, would be angry in a way that came from a very deep and personal place, though Harry couldn't yet say why. He thought about the hat's words. You are the whole. He turned that over. He'd spent his whole life being made to feel like he was less than a part, less than a person, sometimes. A burden. An inconvenience. The freak. The nothing boy in the cupboard who shouldn't take up space or make noise or want things. And now this ancient, half-sentient piece of fabric had looked inside him and said, "You're too much." Harry laughed, actually laughed, the sound of it surprising him in the quiet room. Not much, just a breath of it, but real. Too much. He pressed it against all the years of not enough and felt them cancel out, and in the space where they cancelled out there was, not power, exactly, and not pride. Just something calm. Something that felt, for the first time in his life, like standing on solid ground. He didn't know what he was. He didn't know what this year would look like, or what it meant to be unclassified in a world built around classification. He didn't know what lived in the third-floor corridor or under the Sorting Hat's assessment of him or in the careful eyes of the headmaster who smiled in two different registers simultaneously. But he was here. And the ceiling was not a ceiling but a sky, and somewhere below him in the castle 400 people were thinking about him, and for once in his life that felt less like exposure and more like arrival. Harry Potter pulled his knees to his chest and looked out at the dark water and decided that too powerful for student status was probably, on balance, a better start than the cupboard. He fell asleep in the window seat, his breath fogging the glass, while the lake below him stayed dark and deep and full of things that had no name. In the morning, everything would begin. Across the castle, in an office full of moving pictures and softly ticking instruments, Albus Dumbledore sat very still in his chair for a very long time. He had spent 40 years believing he understood the shape of Harry Potter's destiny. He had held that shape carefully, tended it, arranged the world around it with the precision of a gardener who knows exactly where the light should fall and exactly how the roots should grow. He had planned for courage. He had planned for the specific valiant Gryffindor heart that the prophecy suggested. He had made arrangements, careful, painful, loving arrangements, that depended on a boy who could be guided. He had not planned for a boy who did not need guiding. He had not planned for an 11-year-old who sat in a chair and looked at Albus Dumbledore with eyes that were seeing rather than receiving, and said, calmly and completely without self-pity, "I'd like to be left alone to figure things out in the way that feels right to me." Dumbledore turned his phoenix feather quill over in his fingers, once, twice. Fawkes watched him from his perch. The phoenix's eyes were very gold and very old, and Dumbledore had never been entirely sure how much Fawkes understood. Tonight he suspected it was more than usual. "I may have miscalculated," Dumbledore said to the room. Fawkes trilled once, softly, like a question. "Not about who he is," Dumbledore said. "About what he is." He set the quill down. Looked at the ceiling. The hat was right. I could see at the moment it spoke. There is something in that boy that the founders did not anticipate and I did not anticipate, and I have spent a great deal of time anticipating things. He closed his eyes briefly. I wonder if that has always been the difficulty. That I anticipate, and in anticipating, I narrow. I make corridors where there should be open ground. Fawkes made no sound. He looked at me, Dumbledore said, the way Grindelwald used to. Not the darkness of it, nothing of the darkness. But the clarity. The absolute refusal to be managed. He was quiet. I don't know whether to be afraid or relieved. The fire crackled. The instruments ticked. In the portrait on the wall behind him, Phineas Nigellus Black pretended to be asleep and very carefully was not. Dumbledore sat in the small, private uncertainty of a man who had built his life on knowing things, and felt the unfamiliar architecture of not knowing settle around him like a new and poorly fitting coat. Tomorrow, he said, to no one in particular, will be interesting. Down in the Gryffindor common room, which was full of the restless, murmuring energy of 40 students who were all thinking about the same thing and all pretending to talk about something else, Ron Weasley sat on a red armchair and looked at the fire. Percy had cornered him for 5 minutes of what he called advice and Ron called lecture, telling him to be sensible and not get involved in whatever strangeness the Potter boy brought with him. Fred and George had immediately declared Harry Potter sounded brilliant and they wanted to be his friends. Hermione Granger, who had apparently cornered a copy of Hogwarts, a history from the library's honor shelf and was reading it with the focused urgency of someone diagnosing a symptom, had looked up long enough to say that she'd found no precedent for the hat's behavior, and she found that extremely concerning and extremely interesting in exactly equal measure. Ron had listened to all of this and kept coming back to the same image, Harry Potter standing at the edge of the teacher's table with no house and no seat and no one to sit with, spotting Ron across the hall, and something passing between them that wasn't words exactly. Just, I see you. Ron had grown up the sixth of 7 children in a family where everyone was very loud about everything and individual people tended to get slightly lost in the noise. He understood, in a way he'd never had to articulate, what it meant to be seen specifically. To be found in the crowd. He asked to sit at our table, Hermione said, without looking up from her book. McGonagall told Dumbledore and Dumbledore agreed. I overheard them in the corridor. She paused. He asked specifically to sit with us. With you and me. Ron looked at her. With us? That's what I said. Ron thought about this. He'd known Harry for about 8 hours. They'd shared a train compartment and eaten way too many sweets and talked about Quidditch and families and the general strangeness of the wizarding world, and it had been the easiest conversation Ron had had with someone new since, actually he couldn't remember a since. Harry had listened like he meant it. Like Ron's words were actually the thing he was most interested in, which people almost never were, because Ron was the sixth of 7 and sixth of 7 was not, in anyone's hierarchy, the most interesting. He seems like a good person, Ron said. Hermione lowered her book and looked at him with an expression that said she was reserving judgment on good person, pending further evidence but was not actively dismissing the possibility. For Hermione Granger, Ron had known her 3 hours, this was practically an endorsement. He seems like a complicated situation, she said. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Ron said. Hermione looked at him for a moment, then back at her book. No, she said, with a sort of reluctant precision, as though being fair even when it inconvenienced her. I suppose they're not. The fire crackled. Outside, the lake held its dark and silent watch. Somewhere in the East Tower, a boy who had been told all his life he was nothing slept in a window seat and dreamed of open water. And in the morning, Hogwarts would be a different place than it had been the night before, because things that have been declared aloud in front of 400 people tend to change the air they live in. The hat had spoken. There was no unring that bell. Chapter 2, The Unclassified. The Great Hall at breakfast was a different animal from the Great Hall at the sorting. At the sorting it had been ceremonial, expectant, every face arranged toward the front with the collective attention of an audience that knew the shape of the performance. At breakfast it was chaotic and personal and full of the specific energy of 400 people who had just spent their first night in a new place and were collectively running on insufficient sleep and the smell of bacon. Harry walked in at 7:45 and every single person looked up. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It moved through the room like a ripple, the students nearest the door first, then spreading outward table by table as the information traveled. He's here, he's walking in, look, that's him. Conversations dropped a register. Spoons paused mid-stir. The Ravenclaw table, Harry noticed, went very still in the particular way that meant they were paying acute attention while trying to appear as though they weren't, which was a Ravenclaw speciality. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Ron Weasley. It was a small act, a simple act, a boy sitting down for breakfast. But the way he did it, without hesitation, without looking around for permission, without any visible awareness of the room's attention, made it something else. It made it a statement. Not a performed one. Just the natural consequence of a person who had decided where he was going and gone there. Ron looked up from an enormous pile of toast and said, "Morning. There's pumpkin juice if you want it." Fred says it tastes like soap, but Fred's wrong. It tastes like pumpkin, said George, from 2 seats down, without looking up from his eggs. Those are not mutually exclusive, Harry said, pouring himself a glass. Ron laughed. Actually laughed, the genuine kind that catches you off guard, and something in the room exhaled slightly. Like the collective tension had been waiting for someone to treat Harry Potter normally, and now that it had happened, the room could remember how to breathe. Hermione sat down across from Harry with a book already open next to her plate. She looked at him with her quick, assessing eyes and said, "I've been reading about the Sorting Hat's history." "Good morning to you too," Harry said. "Good morning. I've been reading about the Sorting Hat's history." She didn't wait. It was created by the 4 founders in the early 10th century, enchanted with enough of each of their personalities and magical signatures to assess students in perpetuity. Its decision is theoretically final and binding. There's a passage in Hogwarts, a history about a student in 1612 who tried to appeal his sorting, ended up in Hufflepuff when he wanted Slytherin, and the Wisengamot ruled that the hat's judgment superseded individual preference. She looked at Harry. There is no precedent in any text I could find for what happened last night. The hat told me that too, Harry said. Hermione's expression did something complicated. She clearly found it mildly annoying that the hat had already told Harry what she'd spent 3 hours researching, but was also clearly too interested in the situation to stay annoyed. What did it say to you? Exactly. Harry told her. He'd told McGonagall the night before, and he'd thought about it enough in the window seat before sleep had taken him that he could relay it accurately. He watched Hermione's face as he spoke, the small movements of her expression, the way her eyes went slightly unfocused when she was processing, the pen she'd produced from somewhere and was now using to take notes in the margin of what appeared to be a breakfast menu. The whole, she said, when he'd finished. It said you were, not 4 things but the whole. Right. That's not a category, she said. That's not a category that exists anywhere in the literature. I know. That's remarkable. She looked at him and there was something in her expression that Harry recognized, because he'd felt it in the window seat the night before, not quite awe, but the feeling you get when you've been handed a question so large you don't know where to begin with it, and somehow that feels like a gift rather than a burden. Aren't you curious? About what it means? I'm starving, Harry said, and put a piece of toast in his mouth, and yes. Hermione made a noise that was halfway between exasperation and approval, and went back to her notes. Ron watched this exchange with the expression of someone who had just discovered that their 2 new friends were each a different kind of strange, but that the strangeness was at least complementary. He reached for more toast. So what happens in classes, he said. Do you just go? McGonagall said I attend normally, Harry said. Same schedule as everyone else. But no house points, Ron said. It wasn't a complaint, just an observation. I assume not. The house points system needs a house. Harry looked at the Gryffindor banner above their table, red and gold, the lion gleaming. He felt, not excluded by it, exactly. More like he was looking at a map of a country he wasn't a citizen of, but which he was visiting, and which he found genuinely interesting. I don't mind. You don't mind a lot of things that would mind most people, Ron observed. I grew up with the Dursleys, Harry said. Everything else is fine by comparison. Ron opened his mouth, decided against whatever he was about to say, and went back to his toast with the expression of someone who understood that statement was bigger than it looked and that breakfast was not the moment to excavate it. Down the table, Percy Weasley was reading a letter and pretending he hadn't been listening. Harry caught 2 older students, 5th years, maybe, staring at him from the far end of the Gryffindor table. When he made eye contact, they looked away immediately, then immediately started whispering. From the Slytherin table, he could feel Malfoy watching him the way you feel a draft, constant, directional, coming from somewhere specific. Harry did not look at Malfoy. He drank his pumpkin juice, which did, slightly, taste like soap, and thought about the day ahead. The first class of the morning was Transfiguration, and they arrived to find the room empty except for a tabby cat sitting on the teacher's desk. Ron nudged Harry. "'D'you reckon, the cat became Professor McGonagall between one breath and the next, the transformation so fast and complete it was almost aggressive, a declaration of competence rather than a demonstration of it." She looked at the class over her square-edged glasses with an expression that said she had done this 30 years running and it still made the same point every time. "That," she said, "is what Transfiguration looks like when it's done well. It will be some time before any of you can do that, and most of you never will, and that is perfectly acceptable. What is not acceptable is attempting it without understanding the theory, attempting it without the proper wand work, or attempting it under the impression that it is something to be rushed." She looked at the class. "Transfiguration is precise, demanding, and in the wrong hands, dangerous. I am precise, demanding, and in the wrong hands, well." The corners of her mouth moved, fractionally. "Let's not find out." She assigned them a match to turn into a needle, demonstrated it herself in about a second and a half, and set them to work. Harry looked at the match. He looked at the image of the needle. He thought about what McGonagall had done, not just the external appearance of it, but the idea behind it, the match ceasing to be a match and becoming a needle not because it was forced into it but because, at some level, a match and a needle shared a quality, long, thin, point, and transfiguration was, at its root, a matter of emphasizing what something already was. He wasn't sure if that was right. It was just the thought that came to him. He picked up his wand, made the movement McGonagall had shown them, and thought needle, and the match turned into a needle. Not slowly. Not partially. All at once, clean and complete, silver and sharp-pointed on the desk in front of him, catching the light from the window like a small announcement. He looked at it. Then looked up. McGonagall was standing 3 feet away, watching him with an expression she was visibly working to contain. "That," she said, after a moment, "is correct, Mr. Potter." "Thank you," Harry said. "How did you approach it?" she asked, in the tone of someone asking a genuine question rather than a rhetorical one. Harry explained his thinking, the shared quality, the emphasis. McGonagall went very still the way she'd gone still the night before when he'd said he'd rather sit with his friends. Then she turned to the class and said, "Mr. Potter has just described, with no prior instruction, the fundamental theoretical basis of all transfiguration work. I suggest you write that down." The class wrote it down with the frantic energy of people who had been shown something they'd missed. Ron leaned over and whispered, "That was your first time," and Harry said, "Well, I've never had a wand before yesterday, so," and Ron said, "Merlin," and went back to his match, which turned a slightly silvery color at the tip and then went back to being a match, which was, Harry thought, actually quite good for a first attempt. Hermione's match became a needle approximately 30 seconds after Harry's, and she looked briefly pleased and then immediately competitive with herself about the 30 seconds. By the end of the class Harry had also turned the needle back into a match, turned it into a needle again, turned it back once more, and on impulse had turned it briefly into a small silver fish before turning it back, which had caused McGonagall to pause mid-sentence, look at him very carefully, and then continue speaking without comment. He hadn't planned to do the fish. It had just occurred to him that if you could go from match to needle you could presumably go from match to anything, and curiosity had done the rest. He'd fix that impulse, Harry thought. Or, no. He wouldn't. He'd keep it. It had felt right. The whispers followed him through the day like weather. Not malicious, mostly. Just present. He'd turn a corner and conversation would recalibrate. He'd enter a classroom and the air in it would change, the way air changes when someone notable walks in, a change in pressure, a collective awareness. He heard fragments, "That's him, he's the one, the hat refused, too powerful, did you hear what it said, what does that even mean, do you think he's actually," he let it wash past him. He'd had practice letting things wash past him. 11 years of the Dursleys had been, if nothing else, an excellent education in not being touched by words that weren't true, and while these words weren't cruel they were just as untrue in their assumptions, because they all assumed something about him that he hadn't yet figured out himself. Potions, with Professor Snape, was the day's most interesting hour. Snape entered the way someone enters when they want the room to know they have arrived, and his gaze moved across the class with the precision of a surveillance sweep before landing on Harry with a stillness that was distinctly different from how it had passed over everyone else. "Ah," he said. "Harry Potter." His voice managed to make the name sound like something he had stepped in. The class went very quiet. "Our new celebrity." He said celebrity the way you say the name of a headache. "Tell me, Mr. Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry didn't know. He knew it instantly. He hadn't read ahead on potions the way Hermione clearly had, but he also knew that Snape knew he didn't know, and that the question was not an invitation to answer but an invitation to be small. He recognized that kind of question. The Dursleys had been full of them. Questions shaped like weapons. "I don't know," Harry said. Evenly, without apology. "I haven't studied potions. Yet." Snape's eyes narrowed slightly. He had clearly expected either a wrong answer he could mock or a display of embarrassment he could enjoy, and Harry had given him neither. "Where would you look if I asked you to find it?" "A potions textbook, presumably," Harry said. "Or you?" A brief silence. Someone near the back made a sound that was ruthlessly suppressed. 5 points from, Snape began, then stopped. Something moved across his expression. A small, controlled irritation. "You have no house," he said. "That's right," Harry said. Snape looked at him for another moment with an expression that was more complex than simple hostility. There was something else in it, something Harry couldn't yet read, something that sat underneath the surface like a shape seen through ice. Then Snape moved on, and the class breathed again, and Harry filed it away. He learned quickly that Snape taught the way someone teaches when they love the subject and find the students insufficient for it. The instructions were precise and comprehensive and, underneath the theatrical contempt, genuinely useful, and Harry followed them carefully and produced a potion that Snape paused over for slightly longer than strictly necessary before moving on without comment, which Harry suspected was, for Snape, a form of praise. Hermione's was the only one Snape actually commented on. He said it was adequate, which she received with the expression of someone who had expected to be told it was excellent and was recalibrating. She caught Harry's eye and he raised an eyebrow very slightly and she pressed her lips together against what might have been a smile. Ron's cauldron turned a concerning shade of blue toward the end of class and he fixed it with 5 minutes to spare by following Hermione's whispered instructions, which he then refused to acknowledge had been necessary. After potions, in the corridor, "I still think Snape hates you specifically," Ron told Harry, walking with his bag over one shoulder and his robes not quite straight. "He hates me in a specific way," Harry agreed. "I don't know what way yet." "Does it matter?" Ron asked. Harry thought about it honestly. "Not right now," he said. 3 days into term and Professor Flitwick had stopped calling on other students. It wasn't intentional. Harry could see it wasn't. Flitwick was a fundamentally kind man who believed in educational equity and called on students alphabetically on principle. But when he called on Harry, the answers came back so far ahead of where the class should be that Flitwick kept building on them, and by Thursday they were doing charms work that the textbook listed as third-year content and Flitwick had the expression of a man conducting a master class who had somehow ended up with 11-year-olds in his audience. It wasn't that Harry was showing off. That was the thing. He was just, there, in the material, moving forward through it the way water moves forward, because forward was the direction it went. When something clicked for him, he didn't file it away and wait for the lesson to catch up. He picked up the thread and followed it. Hermione was the only one who kept pace. She did it through sheer relentless preparation. She had clearly read the entire textbook before arriving, which Harry suspected was cheating in some narrow technical sense, and she pushed back on him twice, which he enjoyed, because she pushed back with actual arguments rather than objections, and an actual argument was something you could use. "You're ahead of me in charms," she told him Thursday afternoon, in a tone that suggested this was information she was still integrating. They were in the library, ostensibly doing homework. "You're ahead of me in potions theory," Harry said. "And in herbology. And in basically everything that requires prior reading." "Reading's not the same as," she started. "No, it's different and complementary," Harry said. "Which is why we should probably study together." Hermione looked at him. Then she looked at her books. Then she said, "I was going to suggest that," and pulled her chair slightly closer to the table as though this formally established the arrangement, which Harry suspected, for Hermione, it did. Ron arrived 10 minutes later with his bag and the slightly harassed expression of someone who had left practice for the Gobstones Club and discovered it was not his thing. He dropped into the chair across from Harry, looked at the books on the table, and said, "Right. What are we doing?" "Homework," Harry said. What he said, Hermione agreed. "Brilliant," Ron said, and pulled out his Transfiguration essay with the focused expression of a person preparing for mild suffering. The faculty meeting happened on Thursday evening. Harry wasn't there, obviously. He was in his East Tower rooms reading ahead in his defense against the dark arts textbook, which was thin and somewhat evasive about its subject matter, like a book that had been asked to describe a country it had never visited. But he heard about it, the following morning, through 2 different channels. Channel 1 was Fred Weasley, who had a second-year Slytherin girlfriend who had an older brother on the prefect patrol who had walked past the staff room during what Fred described as an absolute shouting match. "Mate, I'm not even joking." Channel 2 was Professor McGonagall, who appeared in the corridor before breakfast and requested, in her precise, carrying voice, that Harry accompany her to her office for a moment. Her office had a fire and a very organized desk and a tin of shortbread that she didn't offer Harry but did open for herself, which he found somewhat endearing. He sat, and she looked at him with the expression she'd been wearing since the sorting, the expression of a woman renegotiating something. "There was a staff meeting last night," she said. "Regarding your situation." "I heard," Harry said. McGonagall's expression flickered. "From whom?" Fred Weasley said there was shouting. "There was," McGonagall said, with the tone of a woman for whom this was still physically uncomfortable. "There were significant differences of opinion about how to proceed." "What are the options?" Harry asked. She looked at him steadily. "Some members of the faculty," she said, carefully, "feel that the most responsible course of action is to accelerate your education significantly. To give you curriculum appropriate to the level you're actually operating at, rather than the standard first-year course." "Who wants that?" Flitwick. "Professor Vector in Arithmancy, who has heard about your progress in other subjects." Madam Hooch. "Okay. And what does the other side want?" McGonagall was quiet for a moment. "The concern," she said, choosing words with care, "on the part of some colleagues, is that singling you out further will compound the difficulties you're already facing socially. That being separated from your year group for academic reasons, on top of the sorting situation, might be isolating." Harry looked at her. "Who made that argument?" "Professor Dumbledore," she said. And then, in a slightly different tone, "and Professor Snape." "Right," Harry said. He thought about this. It wasn't an unreasonable argument, except, the problem with that argument, he said, is that it assumes normal classes are actually teaching me something. If they're not, then I'm spending time in rooms where I'm not learning anything, which doesn't help anyone, least of all the other students who'd benefit from the teacher being able to teach at their level. McGonagall looked at him for a long, assessing moment. "That," she said, "is exactly what I said." "What did Dumbledore say to that?" "He said that education is as much social as academic." She paused. "Which is not wrong." "No," Harry agreed. "But it's also not the whole picture. Can I make a suggestion?" "Apparently I'm incapable of stopping you," McGonagall said, which was the closest thing to dry humor Harry had yet heard from her. "Keep me in the normal classes," Harry said. "All of them. I'll go at whatever pace the curriculum sets and I won't make things difficult for the teachers. But in the other time. Independent study time. Or evenings. Let me work with whoever's willing at the appropriate level." McGonagall held his gaze. "Who specifically?" "Flitwick," Harry said immediately. "And whoever teaches defense. The textbook is useless." He paused. "And honestly, anyone who'll have me." McGonagall reached forward and took a piece of shortbread. She ate it in small, precise bites. When she was done, she said, "I will discuss it with the relevant staff. I think it is," another pause, another word selection, "workable." "Thank you," Harry said. "Mr. Potter," she said, as he stood. He looked back. "You are either going to be the most interesting student this school has ever had, or the most complicated. I suspect," she said, with a look that was almost warm, "you're going to be both simultaneously." "Probably," Harry said, and smiled, and she made the face she made when she was suppressing a smile and didn't want him to notice, and he left. The corridor outside McGonagall's office connected to the main staircase, which at 8 in the morning was full of students moving between the great hall and the classrooms, and Harry walked through it with the particular awareness of someone who had spent 3 days learning exactly how he was perceived. The first years had mostly sorted themselves into camps, which Harry found somewhat predictable and somewhat funny. There was the group that was openly fascinated. Neville Longbottom approached everything about Harry with a sort of careful wonder, like a person who had adopted a very unusual animal and was trying to understand its needs. Seamus Finnegan had asked him on day 1 if he could really have been put in any house, and when Harry said he didn't know, Seamus had considered this and said, "Wicked," and that had been the end of it, which was very Seamus. Dean Thomas had immediately started drawing something that Harry suspected was a cartoon of the Sorting Hat looking panicked. And then there was the other camp, which was mostly but not exclusively Slytherin, and which expressed its feelings through the specific social technology of looking at Harry, looking away, and saying something to the person next to them. Harry was deeply unbothered by this. He had lived with the Dursleys. If social exclusion was supposed to be a weapon, someone needed to tell him how it worked, because from where he stood it just looked like people choosing not to talk to him, which was fine, because he had Ron and Hermione and approximately 9,000 things to think about. The exception to the Slytherin camp was Daphne Greengrass, a dark-haired girl who sat near the front in most of their shared classes and who looked at Harry with an expression that was neither hostile nor fascinated but simply evaluative. Like someone doing an appraisal. Harry had the impression she was reserving judgment in a way that was fundamentally different from Hermione's judgment reservation, where Hermione's was intellectual, Daphne's was strategic. He found it interesting. He also found, increasingly, that he could sense things about people that he didn't have words for yet. Not thoughts, nothing that specific. More like, resonance. Snape had layers, stacked dark and heavy and old, like sediment in a glass of water. Dumbledore hummed with something vast and very controlled, like a waterfall running through a very narrow channel. Quirrell, when Harry passed him in the corridor on Tuesday morning, had felt wrong in a way that Harry couldn't identify, a wrongness that sat on the edge of his awareness like a note just slightly outside the scale. He didn't mention this to anyone. Not because he was hiding it. Just because he didn't have the language for it yet. Friday morning brought his first broom lesson with Madame Hooch, and with it a confrontation that the school would talk about for 2 weeks. They met on the grounds in the cool September air, a line of school brooms laid out on the grass. Madame Hooch walked the line with the efficient confidence of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years and had seen every possible variation on first-year disaster. She demonstrated the command, up, and showed them the standard grip and watched them try it. Harry said, up, and his broom shot immediately into his hand with a crack. Not drifting up, not wobbling uncertainly, shooting up, like it had been waiting. Several people near him flinched at the sound. Harry looked at the broom in his hand and felt, in a way he was completely unable to articulate, that it was glad to be there. He'd never been on a broom. He hadn't known until right this moment that he was good at flying. But when Madame Hooch told them to kick off gently and rise to a low hover, Harry kicked off and rose 15 feet in 2 seconds as naturally as breathing, and the feeling of it, the wind and the height and the absence of ground, was the most instantly familiar thing he'd encountered since arriving at Hogwarts. Like recognizing a language you hadn't known you'd learned. Potter, Madame Hooch said, from below, her voice carefully neutral. Perhaps a lower altitude for the exercise. Harry came down to about 8 feet, which was where the other students were hovering with various levels of stability. He held the position easily. The broom barely moved. Excellent control, Madame Hooch said, and this time the neutrality had something else underneath it that might have been awe or might have been the particular satisfaction of a woman who had spent 2 decades teaching people to fly badly and had just encountered someone for whom it was instinctive. They were doing hover and bank exercises, gentle arcs across the field, when Draco Malfoy had his idea. Harry had been watching Malfoy the way he watched most things, steadily, without fixating. Malfoy was a good flyer, technically accomplished, and he knew it, and the way he flew communicated both of these things with the precision of someone who had been told from birth that competence was a social currency. He was performing, even now, in a beginner's lesson, for the people watching. And what Malfoy needed, Harry had gathered in 3 days of observation, was an audience. "Not bad, Potter," Malfoy said, gliding past him on the bank. "For someone without a house." He said house the way you say name, like the absence of it was the most important thing about you. Harry didn't respond. "Must be strange," Malfoy continued, circling back on his return arc. He was good at this, good at the casual delivery of carefully aimed observations. "Not belonging anywhere. Not knowing what you are." "I know what I am," Harry said, conversationally. He was watching the horizon, adjusting his angle. "Oh. What's that?" Harry turned his head and looked at Malfoy. Just looked at him, with no particular expression, for about 3 seconds. "Unclassified," he said. "The hat said so." "The hat said you were too powerful," Malfoy said, and his voice had an edge that was very carefully wrapped in lightness. "Or so everyone's saying. Though from where I'm sitting, all I see is a boy with nice broom control and no table to sit at." "And from where I'm sitting," Harry said, "I see a boy who's been performing for an audience since he walked onto this field, and who's spending his flying lesson talking to me instead of flying. Which I think says more about where you're sitting than anything else." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a battlefield just before the artillery fires. Malfoy's expression went from smooth to something tighter and hotter in about half a second. He pulled his broom around sharply and came back at Harry at speed, not attacking, but deliberately too close, the kind of move that was meant to make someone flinch back or lose control. An assertion of dominance in the language of flight. Harry didn't flinch. He simply moved, a small sideways adjustment, a banking arc that took him 6 feet to the left and 10 feet up in a single smooth motion, so that Malfoy's aggressive approach went through empty air, and Harry was now above him, his shadow falling across Malfoy's upturned face in the cool morning light. Malfoy stared up at him. "That was a good line about the table," Harry said, from above. He wasn't gloating. He sounded genuinely thoughtful. "You should save that one. It had good construction." Madame Hooch, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of a woman calculating whether to intervene, made a sound that was ruthlessly suppressed. She turned it into a cough and told the class to return to their exercises. That evening at dinner, Seamus Finnegan told everyone within earshot that Harry had flown circles around Malfoy without even trying, which was slightly embellished, and Hermione told Seamus that embellishment undermined factual accuracy, and Seamus said the factual accuracy was pretty good already, and Ron spent 10 minutes asking Harry to describe every detail of the broom handling with the focus of someone taking notes. "You have to try out for Quidditch," Ron said. "I'm a first year," Harry said. "First years don't play." "Rules change," said Fred, from further down the table, not looking up from his food, his tone carrying the serenity of a man who was completely certain about something and was simply stating it. Harry ate his dinner and thought that Fred was probably right. Sunday was the first day Harry had to himself, fully, no classes, no structured anything, and he spent the morning the way he spent most unstructured time, which was moving, because moving helped him think. He walked the castle. Not aimlessly, Harry was not an aimless person, but with the deliberate attention of someone learning a map. He'd already discovered that Hogwarts was not a fixed thing, that corridors moved and staircases changed and that rooms appeared in places they hadn't been the day before, and he found this delightful in a way that the other first years found baffling. They wanted the castle to behave. Harry wanted to understand why it didn't. He was on the 3rd floor when he noticed the door. It was not the 3rd floor corridor's main door, the one with Dumbledore's very conspicuous "Do Not Enter" warning, which Harry had noted and set aside as something to investigate when he had more information. This was a different door, set back slightly into an alcove, old oak, with a lock that was very clearly not a standard lock. It had the feel of something that was specifically not supposed to draw attention, which meant it very specifically drew Harry's attention. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he moved on, because this was not the day for that door, and Harry had enough of a sense of timing to know the difference between now and not yet. He found the library and spent 2 hours reading about magical theory, and then went down to the kitchens, He'd found the entrance on his second day, the pear portrait, and the house elves had been delighted by him in a way that was simultaneously touching and slightly overwhelming, and came back up with a plate of biscuits and went to find Ron. Ron was in the Gryffindor common room trying to write his astronomy essay and getting comprehensively destroyed by it. Harry sat down beside him and they worked through it together, and then Hermione arrived with 3 books and an expression that suggested she'd been reading since 6 that morning, and the 3 of them spent the afternoon in the particular productive chaos of people who work well together without having agreed to. Hermione asked Harry, at one point, while he was looking out the common room window at the grounds below, whether he found it strange, being neither Gryffindor nor anything else, sitting in the Gryffindor common room on McGonagall's semi-official permission without belonging to it. Harry thought about it. "It's like visiting," he said. "Which is fine. I like visiting." "But you don't have a common room of your own," she said. "I mean, the East Tower, but that's just mine," he said. He hadn't meant it to come out that certain. But it was true. The East Tower rooms, the window seat, the fire, they were his in a way that something shared with 40 people couldn't quite be. He'd never had a space of his own before. He wasn't sure he minded not having a house if it meant the East Tower. "It's actually fine," he said. Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether to argue with something and concluded it wasn't worth it. She went back to her potions notes. Harry watched the grounds a moment longer, the sweep of grass toward the lake, the dark line of the forest beyond, and felt, again, that low steady calm that had been his companion since the window seat on the first night. He was here. He was learning. He had 2 people who, in the space of a week, had become something he would have called, in another life, home. He didn't need a house for that. The afternoon light moved across the common room and outside the clouds broke and the grounds went gold, and Hermione found what she was looking for in her 3rd book and made a small triumphant noise, and Ron's essay reached its required length and he announced this to the room with the energy of someone finishing a marathon, and Harry ate the last biscuit and thought about the door on the 3rd floor and the thing inside Quirrell that felt wrong and the curriculum he was about to outrun in every subject, and felt, cleanly and fully, alive. Monday morning, Professor Dumbledore appeared at breakfast. Not to eat, he was already seated at the teacher's table with his usual serenity. He appeared at the Gryffindor table in the sense that he materialized at Harry's elbow in the way of very tall, very old men who have learned that appearing rather than approaching is more effective. He bent slightly and said, quietly, "Harry. A word, when you're finished." "I'm finished now," Harry said, putting down his fork. He looked up at Dumbledore steadily. Dumbledore smiled. "Your appetite is an educator's nightmare," he said. "Walk with me." They walked the corridor outside the Great Hall, Dumbledore with his hands clasped behind his back, Harry keeping pace easily beside him. The early morning corridor was quiet, a few older students moving past, glancing at the unusual pair. "I've been thinking," Dumbledore said, "about the Hat's declaration." "So have I," Harry said. "Have you come to any conclusions?" "Some," Harry said. "You?" Dumbledore looked at him sideways and the morning light caught his glasses and made his eyes very bright. "I've come to the conclusion," he said carefully, "that there are things about your situation here that I will need to monitor closely. Not to interfere," he added, and Harry caught the intentionality of the addition, "but to ensure your safety." "What are you worried about?" Harry asked. "Your presence here," Dumbledore said, equally carefully, "is significant beyond the event of the sorting. You are known in the world. People have strong feelings about you. Those feelings will not always be positive, and some of them may become complicated over time." "You mean Voldemort," Harry said. The name in the corridor made the air go strange, the way it did when you said it in front of most wizards. Dumbledore did not flinch, but he noticed Harry didn't either, and he noticed that, Harry could see. "Among other things," Dumbledore said. "Then we should probably talk about that properly," Harry said. "Not now. But soon. And when we do, I'd like you to actually tell me things rather than guide me toward conclusions you've already reached." They stopped walking. Dumbledore looked down at him, and the morning light was less useful now in reading his expression, but Harry thought what was in it was genuine. Genuinely uncertain, genuinely reconsidering, genuinely something. "You are," Dumbledore said, slowly, "quite unlike what I expected." "People keep saying that," Harry said. "Does it bother you?" Harry thought about it honestly. "It would bother me more if people's expectations were right," he said. "Because most people's expectations of me, up until last week, involved a cupboard." Dumbledore was very still for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was quieter than usual and had less performance in it, "I am sorry for that, Harry. For what your childhood was." Harry looked at him and believed, for the first time in this conversation, that the thing on Dumbledore's face was simply what it appeared to be. "I know," Harry said. "Thank you." And then, soon, though. The proper conversation. "There are things in this school I need to understand." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "There are." And Harry walked back toward the great hall and Dumbledore stood in the corridor a moment longer, watching him go, and thought very carefully about the difference between protecting someone and underestimating them, and whether he had, in all his careful arrangements and long-laid plans, consistently failed to distinguish between the two. Chapter 3, The Weight of Eyes. The Quidditch tryouts notice went up on a Wednesday. Harry found it because Ron found it, and Ron found it because Fred had written Ron in enormous letters at the bottom of the parchment with a self-inking quill and signed it the management, which meant Ron had spotted it from 6 feet away while trying to pretend he wasn't looking for it. The notice was standard: Gryffindor Quidditch team, open trials for 1 chaser position, Saturday morning, 7 o'clock. Below the official announcement was a second line, added in a different hand, captain's writing, clean and decisive, first years may apply. Exceptions can be made. "That's for you," Ron said. "The exception line is probably for me," Harry agreed. "You should go." "I'm thinking about it." "You flew 15 feet in 2 seconds on a school broom," Ron said. "Those are terrible brooms." "Ours are fine, they work, but they handle like shopping trolleys compared to actual competition brooms." "If you can do what you did on a school broom, I'd still be a first year on the team," Harry said. "The older players might not want that." "Wood's the captain," Ron said. "Oliver Wood. He genuinely doesn't care about anything except whether you can play. My brothers say he once made the team practice through a thunderstorm because the match was in 2 weeks and weather conditions were relevant experience." He paused. "He's a bit mad, honestly. But fair mad, not mean mad." Harry looked at the notice. Then at the sky through the corridor window, cold, gray, the trees on the edge of the grounds going red and gold with October's first reach. "I'll go," he said. Hermione, who had been reading and pretending not to listen to this conversation since the beginning, said, without looking up, "Tryouts are at 7, which is before breakfast, which means you should eat something before you go, which I mention because neither of you ever eat enough breakfast." "We eat plenty of breakfast," Ron said. "You eat toast." "Toast is not breakfast. Toast is the foundation of breakfast." "Toast," Hermione said, turning a page, "is a grain-based carbohydrate with insufficient protein for sustained physical activity, Ronald." Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. "She's right," Harry said. Ron looked betrayed. Saturday arrived with a sky that couldn't decide between mist and rain and had compromised on both, which meant the Quidditch pitch at 7 in the morning was wet and gray and cold in the specific way that English October mornings are cold, committed to it, unapologetic, deeply uninterested in your comfort. Harry ate eggs before he went. Hermione looked satisfied. Ron ate 2 pieces of toast and called it a balanced meal, and Hermione made a noise that conveyed her opinion on this without requiring words. The pitch was already occupied when Harry arrived. Oliver Wood was there, 20 feet up on his broom, not practicing anything specific but clearly unable to stop moving, a keeper who had spent too much time in a body too fast for the ground. He came down when he saw Harry. Oliver Wood was a sixth year with a Scottish accent and eyes that, when they looked at you, were looking at you specifically as a Quidditch variable. Not unkindly. Just, specifically. He looked at Harry the way Madame Hooch had looked at him, evaluation before personality, assessment before relationship. "Potter," he said. "You're the one who flew the other day. Was I being watched?" Harry asked. "Madame Hooch told me," Wood said, with no embarrassment about it. "She said you went from 0 to 15 feet in about 2 seconds with perfect control, on a clean sweep 3. A clean sweep 3 it's a very old broom. Most people can barely coax them off the ground. She said she'd never seen a first-year fly like that, and I've been flying since I was 5 and I want to see it myself." He handed Harry a broom, a Nimbus 2000, which Harry had read enough to know was a good broom, a very good broom, polished and light in the hand with a warm aliveness to it that the clean sweep had only whispered at. "The seeker position's filled, obviously, but there's a chaser open. I want to see what you can do." "What do I need to show you?" Harry asked. "Fly the pitch," Wood said. "Then we'll see about the rest." Harry got on the Nimbus. He didn't think about what he was doing. That was the thing about flying that had been true from the very first moment. It didn't require the front of his mind, the planning and the analysis and the careful working through that most things needed. It lived somewhere else, somewhere more immediate, and what that somewhere said, the moment he was on the broom and off the ground, was yes. Just that. An unqualified yes. He did a full circuit of the pitch at speed, and the speed was, it was startling, even to him, the Nimbus having a completely different relationship with distance than the clean sweep had. He banked hard into the upper curve, dropping his inside shoulder the way you drop into a turn, and came out of it accelerating, and then he flew the pitch the way he walked corridors and worked through magic, not performing, just going, just following what felt right, and what felt right was faster and sharper and more precise than anything a beginner had any business doing on a broom. He came down after 2 minutes and Wood was standing with his mouth slightly open. "Right," Wood said, after a moment. "Right." He said it again, with no other words, and Harry thought that for Oliver Wood, this was probably the equivalent of an extended speech. "You're on the team. What about the trials?" Harry asked. "You just did them," Wood said. 3 other potential chaser candidates arrived over the next 20 minutes and tried out in good faith, and they were fine. 2 of them were quite good, but Wood's decision had clearly been made before they'd finished their first circuit, and his attention during their tryouts had the distracted quality of someone going through a necessary formality. He thanked them all and told the other 2 they'd been close and that there were more positions next year, and he was kind about it, because Wood was fair mad not mean mad, as Ron had said. Harry walked back to the castle with the mist settling in his hair and the particular warmth of having done something well at something that mattered, which was a warmth he was still learning to recognize because he hadn't had much practice with it. Halfway up the path, Draco Malfoy fell into step beside him. Not casually, it was too studied to be casual. He'd been waiting somewhere, Harry thought, which meant he'd known about the tryouts, which meant he paid more attention to Harry's movements than he probably wanted Harry to know. Harry clocked this and kept walking. "Trying to buy your way onto the team?" Malfoy said. "Or did they make a special exception for the boy with no house and very good PR?" Wood said I was on, Harry said. "You could ask him about his decision-making process." "I find it interesting," Malfoy said, keeping pace, his robes not getting damp the way Harry's were, which meant he'd done a water-repelling charm, which Harry filed away as something to learn. "That you keep being given things the rest of us have to earn." Harry stopped walking. Malfoy stopped a half step later, which meant he'd been tracking Harry's pace unconsciously, which told Harry something. Harry turned and looked at him. Malfoy was taller than him by about an inch, and he was doing the thing he did, the chin up, the eyes level, the careful blankness that meant he was performing certainty he didn't entirely feel. Up close, Harry could read him more clearly than he'd been able to at a distance, and what he read was this: Malfoy was a boy who had been told, his entire life, that there was an order to things. Blood and house and name and inheritance, all arranged in a hierarchy that explained the world and also, conveniently, placed Malfoy near the top. And Harry, unclassified, unhoused, given things by a hat that had never done this before, was not threatening because he was powerful. He was threatening because he didn't fit the hierarchy. And if Harry didn't fit it, the hierarchy might not be as fixed as Malfoy needed it to be. Harry understood this. He didn't have contempt for it, exactly. It was just, sad, a little. To need the world to be arranged a specific way so badly that anything which disagreed with the arrangement felt like an attack. I haven't been given anything, Harry said. The hat made an observation about what it found. Wood watched me fly and made a decision. Those aren't gifts. They're just, what happened. And you have nothing to do with it, Malfoy said, sarcastically. I have everything to do with it, Harry said. That's not the same as it being given. Malfoy stared at him. The mist was thickening around them, making everything soft and grey and close, and they were two boys standing on a path in the early morning and the school was visible above them, warm light in the windows, and somewhere far above them the sky was doing its indifferent weather. You think you're better than everyone here, Malfoy said. Not casually, now. Directly. No, Harry said. He meant it. I think I'm different from the categories you're used to. That's not the same thing. My father says, I'm sure he does, Harry said. And it wasn't cold, and it wasn't contemptuous, but it landed harder than either would have because it was simply true. Malfoy's arguments came with a citation attached, and the citation was his father, and you couldn't build anything durable on a foundation that was someone else's opinion. Harry could see Malfoy process this and didn't wait for the response. I'm going to have breakfast, he said. You should too. The mist is getting worse. He walked up toward the castle. He didn't look back. Malfoy stood in the mist for a long moment and then walked in after him, slightly behind, taking a different door, not a retreat, but a direction that was distinctly not following. That afternoon, in the Slytherin common room, according to Daphne Greengrass, who mentioned it to Hermione several days later in the library, Draco Malfoy sat very still for about 20 minutes and said almost nothing, which was unprecedented, and which several of his housemates found more alarming than anything he might have said. The real conversation with Dumbledore happened on a Tuesday evening in the third week of October. Harry had sent a note through McGonagall, which McGonagall had delivered without comment and with the expression of a woman who approved of directness and was trying not to show it, requesting a meeting. Dumbledore had responded with an invitation to his office that evening, come after 8, bring nothing, the tone warm and slightly careful in the way Dumbledore's everything was warm and slightly careful. The gargoyle moved for Harry without requiring a password, which was interesting, and which Harry noted, and which he suspected meant either that Dumbledore had arranged it specifically or that Hogwarts itself was making a statement. He thought it might be the latter, actually. The castle had been doing small things like this, doors opening before he reached them, staircases staying put when he was on them, the right book being on top of the pile when he came to the library. He didn't know what to make of it yet. It didn't feel intrusive. It felt more like the castle was paying attention. Dumbledore's office was full of quietly extraordinary things, instruments, portraits, the great bird fox burning low and red and gold on his perch like an ember keeping itself warm. The sorting hat sat on its shelf and Harry glanced at it and it said nothing, but he had the impression it was paying close attention. Harry, Dumbledore said, rising from his desk. Sit down. Lemon drop? No thank you, Harry said, and sat. He looked at the instruments on the shelves, small, spinning, silver, tracking things Harry couldn't identify. He looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him with eyes like hammered copper, and made a sound so soft and so brief that it was barely a sound at all, more like the idea of one. You have questions, Dumbledore said, settling back into his own chair. Many, Harry said. But the most pressing ones are these. He counted them out, the way he'd organized them in the East Tower the night before. What is in the third-floor corridor? What is Voldemort's current situation? What the prophecy says. And why you placed me with the Dursleys? Dumbledore was very still. Those are, he said, after a moment, significant questions. Yes, Harry said. I know. He waited. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with those very blue eyes. Harry had spent 3 weeks learning to read the registers of Dumbledore's expressions, and he watched this one carefully. The warmth was there, the precision, but underneath it something else was moving, something that was neither warm nor cold but simply honest, working its way toward the surface against what must have been considerable habitual resistance. You first, Dumbledore said. The Dursleys. You placed me there intentionally, Harry said. After my parents died. You knew what they were and you put me there anyway. I did, Dumbledore said. Why? Blood protection, Dumbledore said, and he said it plainly, without softening it. Your mother sacrificed herself for you. That sacrifice created a very powerful magical protection, one which, so long as you lived with someone who shared your mother's blood, would shield you from Voldemort's direct harm. He paused. Petunia was the only person who qualified. Harry thought about this. He'd suspected something like it. The logic was sound in the way that terrible things are sometimes logically sound. You knew what they were like, he said. Or you found out. At some point you knew. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. And you left me there anyway. I did. Harry looked at him and didn't perform the anger that was somewhere in him about this. It was real, it was there, but performing it felt like giving it away, and the anger was his, and he needed to keep it until he knew what to do with it. I understand the logic, he said. The protection mattered more than the comfort. I understand that. A beat. It doesn't make it right. But I understand it. Dumbledore's expression, for just a moment, was simply that of a man carrying something very heavy. No, he said. It doesn't make it right. He said it like he meant it. I am sorry, Harry. I believe you, Harry said. He did. Now. The corridor. Dumbledore's expression shifted, the weight of the previous moment moving to a different register, becoming something more guarded. He thought for a moment. Then, there is an object being kept at Hogwarts this year for safekeeping. The corridor guards it. The nature of the object is, not something I intend to discuss in detail. Something Voldemort wants, Harry said. Yes. And you've put it here because Hogwarts is the safest place you know. Yes. Is it safe enough? Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at him. I believe so. You believe so, Harry said. That's not the same as yes. Another beat. No, Dumbledore said. It is not the same as yes. Harry nodded. He thought about the wrongness he felt from Quirrell, the layered, off-note resonance of a man who was two things at once. He decided, quickly and precisely, how much to say. There's something wrong with Professor Quirrell, he said. The stillness that came over Dumbledore in that moment was different from his other stillnesses. This one was sharp. Pointed. What do you mean by wrong? He asked carefully. When I'm near him, Harry said, he feels, layered. Like there's something underneath, something that doesn't match the surface. I don't know if I'm describing it well. I don't have the vocabulary for it yet. Dumbledore was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had changed, not warmth or care or management, just directness. You can feel that? Can't you? Harry said. Another silence. Longer. Yes, Dumbledore said. I can. And I have been monitoring the situation. He looked at Harry with an expression that was, for the first time, fully unguarded, the face of a man who was genuinely uncertain and had decided that certainty was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Harry, I must ask you to keep this between us. What you've sensed about Quirrell, say nothing to your friends, not yet. And I would ask you not to approach him or the corridor independently. I'm not promising that, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. I'm not going to do something reckless, Harry said. But I won't make a promise I might need to break. That seems worse than not making it. Dumbledore held his gaze and Harry held it back and the fire crackled and Fawkes shifted on his perch and the instruments ticked, and then Dumbledore said, very quietly, "You are the most honest first year I have ever had in this office." "The prophecy," Harry said. "What does it say?" Dumbledore's hands, which had been resting easily on his desk, pressed together slightly. "That," he said, "I will tell you. But not tonight. And not because I'm keeping it from you, I want to be clear about that. But because there are some things I believe you are better equipped to receive when you are older, and this is one of them, and I want you to trust me when I say it is not management. It is care." Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about the difference between the two, about whether Dumbledore knew the difference between them, or whether, in this man's long and careful life, they had become so blended together that he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "I'll give you that one," Harry said. "For now." "Thank you," Dumbledore said, and it sounded genuine, and tired, and slightly like a man who had just survived something unexpected. "Is there anything else?" Harry stood. "Yes," he said. "But it'll keep." He moved to the door, then paused. "Thank you for telling me the truth. About the Dursleys. You could have dressed it up more." "I thought about it," Dumbledore admitted. "I know," Harry said. "I'm glad you didn't." And he left. He went to find Ron and Hermione. They were in the library, which had become their default location in the evenings, partly because the books were there, and partly because the library's specific combination of quiet and privacy gave them space to talk without performing for an audience. Ron had developed a very efficient system of looking like he was doing homework while actually doing nothing, which meant he was always available for conversation without technically being derelict in his responsibilities. Harry sat down, looked at them both, and said, "I want to tell you some things." They looked at him. Ron put his quill down. Hermione closed her book. The seriousness of the gesture, Hermione closing a book voluntarily, told Harry that they'd both been waiting for this moment, that they'd been watching him process things for 3 weeks and they'd been patient and they'd been here, and the quality of their patience was its own kind of statement. He told them about the conversation with Dumbledore. About the blood protection and the Dursleys, about the third-floor corridor, about the object being kept there. He told them about Quirrell, the layered wrongness, without going into the thing he was beginning to privately suspect, which was that the wrongness had a very specific shape and name. Hermione listened with her hands flat on the table in front of her, her face doing the thing it did when she was holding a large quantity of new information and organizing it in real time. Ron listened the way Ron listened, which was with his whole body, leaning forward, occasionally making small sounds of reaction, not interrupting. When Harry finished, Ron said, "Quirrell," in a tone of genuine incredulity. "He's terrified of everything. He's afraid of his own class." "That's what you'd look like," Harry said carefully, "if something you were afraid of was right there with you all the time." Ron thought about this. "Right," he said, slowly. "Yeah, okay." "The corridor," Hermione said. She'd retrieved a notebook from somewhere and was writing in it. "The object Dumbledore mentioned. Dumbledore said it's being guarded. There must be multiple layers, a single guard wouldn't justify that level of warning." "Probably," Harry said. "And whatever it is, Quirrell, or whoever's using Quirrell, wants it." She looked at Harry. "You think it's Voldemort? Don't you? Using Quirrell somehow?" "I think it's a possibility I'm taking seriously," Harry said. Hermione wrote something. Ron made a face that was the face of someone who had been raised with the fear of Voldemort's name and was sitting next to a boy who said it with the casual precision of someone saying rain or Tuesday. He'd been making this face periodically for 3 weeks and each time Harry said the name it got slightly smaller. "So what do we do?" Ron said. "Nothing, yet," Harry said. "Dumbledore knows. He's watching it. I don't have enough information to do anything useful, and doing something with insufficient information is worse than waiting. Ron stared at him. You are the least 11-year-old I've ever met. You've only met 11-year-olds this week, Harry pointed out. The principal stands. Hermione looked between them with the expression she wore when they were being funny in a situation that she would like to take seriously, but which she secretly also found funny. Can we focus? She said. Yes, Harry said. What do you know about Horcruxes? The word dropped into the library quiet like a stone into still water. Hermione went completely still. Not her normal processing stillness, something sharper. Her eyes went to her notebook, then back to Harry. Where did you hear that word? Something the hat showed me, Harry said. When it was going through my memories. There was an impression. A shape. I've been trying to work out what it was ever since. Hermione stared at him for a very long moment. Harry, she said, and her voice was careful in the way that Dumbledore's voice was careful, except where Dumbledore's careful was about management, Hermione's was about precision. That word that's not in any of the first-year books. Or the second. Or most of the upper-year curriculum. It's restricted section. I know, Harry said. How do you know if you didn't know the word before? Because I could feel the restriction on it, Harry said. Which made it worth looking up. Another silence. Ron had gone very still beside him, not understanding the word but understanding, with the instinct of someone who had grown up magical, that it was serious. I haven't read the specific texts, Hermione said, slowly. But I've read enough adjacent material to know it refers to objects. Made with very dark magic. For a very specific purpose. She looked at him with her careful eyes. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Harry said. I'm gathering information. But I want to know more. He looked at her. Can you access the restricted section? Students can't access it without a signed permission from a teacher, Hermione said automatically. And then, after a pause, in a slightly different tone, I might be able to get Professor Flitwick to sign a general research note. He's been quite amenable to my studying extra material. That would be useful, Harry said. Hermione wrote something in her notebook, drew a firm line under it, and then looked at Harry with the expression that had become one of Harry's favorite things in his 3 weeks at Hogwarts, the expression of Hermione Granger when she had committed to something and was organizing the scale of her commitment. It was like watching someone lay out tools before a very precise job. Right, she said. I'll see what I can find. This is mad, Ron said, but he said it the way you say something you know is mad and are going to do anyway, because some people have a compass that points toward mad the way others point toward safe, and Ron Weasley's compass had always gone slightly sideways. He picked up his quill. Right then. What do I do? Keep being Ron, Harry said. Ron looked at him. I mean it, Harry said. You have very good instincts. More than you give yourself credit for. And right now the most important thing is that we're all three paying attention to different things. I pay attention to the magic and what I can feel. Hermione pays attention to the information. You pay attention to the people. Ron thought about this. I pay attention to people. You noticed within 2 days that Quirrell's terror was different from Neville's anxiety, Harry said. You spotted that Snape was watching the corridor on the 3rd floor during the staff procession. You told me before I'd worked it out myself that Percy was reporting on me to someone, which I believe is Dumbledore, not maliciously, just habitually. You notice people. Ron sat with this for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, the way expressions shift when someone says a true thing about you that you'd never quite said to yourself. Yeah, he said, quietly. Okay. Yeah. Hermione was looking at Ron with the expression of someone recalibrating, and Harry watched her do it and thought, this is what they needed. Not to be explained to each other, but to be shown. Outside the library windows, the grounds were full of autumn dark, the lake somewhere out there invisible and cold, and in the castle walls somewhere above them a corridor waited with a door and a warning and a thing being kept, and in a classroom 2 floors below, a man with 2 things inside him went through the motions of his evening with the jittery, exhausted quality of a person who was running out of time. Harry felt it from here. Faint but real. The wrongness of Quirrell, like a wrong note, like 2 melodies trying to occupy the same space. He filed it away. He would need it later. For now he had his friends and his library and his East Tower and all the information still to gather, and that was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. That was everything. 3 days later, on a grey Friday afternoon, something happened that made the castle talk for a week. It began in defense against the dark arts. Quirrell had assigned them a practical, simple deflection charms, first-year level, partnered work. Harry was partnered with Hermione because their names came out together alphabetically, which meant they finished the exercise in approximately 4 minutes while the rest of the class was still working, because Harry's deflection charm worked the first time and Hermione's worked the second time, and between them they had the mechanics of it so thoroughly examined within one exchange that continuing seemed redundant. Quirrell came to check on them, and Harry felt the wrongness again the moment he was closer than in the corridor, and therefore stronger, the layered quality of him pressing at the edges of Harry's perception. He watched Quirrell's hands as he demonstrated an adjustment to Hermione's wand angle, and the hands were fine but the man behind them was thin. Stretched. Like something being shared out too thin across too large a surface. Very good, Miss G. Granger," Quirrell said. "Mr. Potter." His stutter was worse today than usual. His turban, always slightly out of place, listed slightly to the left. He looked at Harry and his eyes had the particular quality of a man trying to look normal while something inside him that was not normal pushed against his surface. Harry held his gaze steadily. "Thank you, Professor." And then the thing that was not Quirrell pushed forward. Harry felt it before he saw the evidence of it, a sudden sharpening in the wrongness, like a temperature change, and then Quirrell's eyes changed. Not dramatically. Just, deepened. Went from shallow and frightened to something old and measuring, like a predator choosing its moment. The voice, when it came out, was Quirrell's voice but shaped differently, the stutter gone, replaced by something smooth and terrible and utterly still. "You feel it, don't you? The power in this room." Harry said nothing. He just looked at the men, in front of him. "Remarkable," the voice said. "A child." And then the heat came. Not literal heat, a pressure, magical and enormous and pointed, like the full attention of something very large and very old suddenly turned on one small person. A pressure designed to make you small. To make you feel the weight of what was looking at you and fold under it. Harry didn't fold. He felt the pressure and he met it, not pushing back. He wasn't pushing, he was just there, standing in his own space, occupying his own ground, and the pressure found him and found nothing in him that would collapse. His magic, which he was still learning to name, did something then, not aggressive, not showy, just a settling, like a ship dropping anchor in rough water. He was here, the magic said. He was here and he was not going to be less than that. The entire class went cold. Every student in the room felt it. They couldn't have named what it was, most of them, but they felt the shift, the way the air changed, the moment when 2 very different things were occupying the same room and one of them was larger than anyone had expected. Hermione's hand found her wand under the desk. Ron, who was at the table behind Harry, had gone very still. Quirrell blinked. The deepness in his eyes receded, like a tide pulling back, and what was left was the usual Quirrell, pale, trembling, with a line of sweat along his hairline. "Excellent work," he said, and moved away down the aisle, and his hands were shaking. The class exhaled. Hermione turned to Harry immediately, her eyes wide, her voice dropped to the very low register she used when she was serious and did not want to be overheard. "What was that?" "I'm not sure," Harry said. Which was the truth? Something happened. Between you and, yes. Harry. She looked at him, and in her eyes was not fear but the particular intensity of Hermione Granger, who has just observed something significant and needs to understand it fully. "Whatever's in Quirrell pushed at you. I could feel it from here. And you didn't move." "No," Harry said. "Why not?" Harry thought about how to say it. "Because I didn't need to," he said. "It was looking for something to push against and there wasn't anything." Hermione stared at him. She started, and then stopped, and he watched her work through several responses and settle on, "I need to read more." "Probably," Harry agreed. Behind them, Ron leaned forward and said, very quietly, into Harry's ear, "Told you something was wrong with Quirrell." "You were right," Harry said. Ron sat back with the expression of a person who would normally say "I told you so," and was choosing, with significant effort, not to, which Harry recognized and appreciated. Quidditch practice that evening went well, which Harry needed. There was something about the Quidditch pitch, the cold air and the open sky and the physical reality of it, the broom doing what it did and the world being large and clear and without complications, that reset something in Harry that the indoor magical world pressed on. He flew drills with the team, ran passing patterns with the chasers, and at one point would set him a problem, two beaters working against him in a compressed area, that Harry solved by going up instead of sideways, gaining height in one sharp climb and coming down on the other side of the defense on a line nobody had been guarding because nobody had expected the upward movement. Wood stopped practice for 30 seconds to stare at him. Wood started. "Obvious," Harry said, honestly. "Not to me," one of the chasers said, a fifth-year named Alicia Spinnet, who had taken Harry's presence on the team with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who cared about winning matches. "Not from down here." "He's thinking in 3 dimensions, said Katie Bell, who was the most analytically minded of the chasers. "He doesn't default to horizontal movement." "I didn't have a lot of open space growing up," Harry said. The truth of it was both simpler and more complicated than that. The open sky of the pitch was the most room he'd ever had, in a sense that went beyond physical, and his body knew it and moved accordingly. "Upward tends to be free." Wood wrote something in his battered strategy notebook. He always seemed to be writing things in the strategy notebook, which Harry suspected served some psychological function beyond the practical. After practice, walking back toward the castle in the early evening dark, Alicia Spinnet came up beside Harry. She was a 5th year with a serious face and a way of speaking that suggested most of what she said had been considered first. "You're good," she said. "I mean that as a statement of fact. But the team had a dynamic before you. I just want to know, what's your thing? Like, do you play to dominate, or do you play to win? Because they're different." Harry thought about it. "Play to win," he said. "Dominating's a performance. Winning's a result." Alicia looked at him sideways for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and walked up to the castle faster, and that was apparently the conversation, and Harry thought that was a good conversation. That night, in the East Tower, Harry sat in the window seat and felt the castle around him. Not metaphorically, actually felt it. He'd been doing this more and more, a habit that had started as curiosity and had become something more like practice. Hogwarts was alive in a way that most people moved through without noticing, the way you move through air without noticing air. It had a pulse, slow, vast, deep. The wards were woven through the stone itself, so old they had almost become the stone, and they knew him in the way that old things come to know someone who pays them attention. He sat with the castle and thought about Quirrell. About the pressure and what had been behind it, the ancient cold intelligence that had looked through Quirrell's eyes like a man looking through a keyhole. He thought about what he'd said to Hermione, it was looking for something to push against, and he thought about whether that was something he could maintain if the pressure were to come full force rather than in a glancing test. He didn't know. He knew he hadn't been afraid. He knew the not afraid was real and not performance. He knew that whatever lived in him, the thing the hat had identified, the thing that didn't fit in the houses, was not quiet or small, and that when it had settled itself in that classroom, the thing in Quirrell had pulled back. That was useful information. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and the lake below was black and perfectly still, the stars finally out, the sky clear for the first time in a week. The giant squid sent one enormous arm above the surface, briefly, and went back down. Somewhere in the castle someone was playing a melancholy piece on a piano that Harry hadn't known was there. Tomorrow was Saturday. He had independent study with Flitwick in the afternoon, which had become one of his favorite things at Hogwarts. Flitwick had the quality of all truly excellent teachers, which was enthusiasm without ego, a man who got genuinely excited about the subject rather than about his mastery of it. And in the morning he'd read, and in the evening he'd go over what he'd felt in Quirrell's class and try to work out what to do with it. He had time, he thought. He wasn't sure how much, but some. The Philosopher's Stone, because that's what it was, he was reasonably sure, based on Hermione's preliminary research and the pieces Dumbledore had given him, was guarded, and whatever was in Quirrell was not yet strong enough to take it. The wrongness he felt from Quirrell was considerable but unsteady, the wrongness of something growing rather than something established. Growing, though. He'd felt that too. He needed to understand it better before it finished growing. Harry watched the stars and the lake and the castle breathed around him, and in the faint distance someone's piano played on into the dark, and the weight of everything he was carrying settled around him not like a burden but like ballast, the kind that keeps a ship stable in deep water, the kind you need to go anywhere that matters. He was 11 years old and there was something ancient and terrible living in his defense professor's head and an object worth more than most small countries hidden in the bowels of the school, and tomorrow he would have breakfast and fly and study and it would all be fine, because he had decided to make it fine, and there was something in him, something the hat had seen, that tended to get what it decided on. He fell asleep in the window seat again. The castle kept watch. Chapter 4, What Lives in the Walls. November arrived like someone had opened a door and let in everything that had been waiting outside. The temperature dropped overnight and the lake went slate gray and the grounds crunched underfoot with the first hard frosts, and Hogwarts contracted inward in the way of old stone buildings that have spent centuries learning how to keep warmth, tighter corridors, more fires, the smell of wood smoke threading through every floor. The students contracted with it, spending more time indoors, and the indoor time had the specific quality of people who had spent 6 weeks figuring out the social geometry of their world and were now pressed more closely together within it. Harry noticed the pressure of this. The closer quarters made everything more legible, allegiances more visible, tensions more concentrated, the normal social weather of an institution turned up slightly in intensity. He watched it the way he watched most things at Hogwarts, with the curious attention of someone who was in the middle of it and also somehow slightly outside it, which was the particular position of being unclassified in a world built on classification. He had a Quidditch match in 2 weeks and a defense essay due Friday and a meeting with Flitwick on Saturday that he was genuinely looking forward to, and he'd been awake since 5 thinking about Quirrell. Not obsessively. He didn't do obsession. Obsession was what happened when something took up all the available space in your head and crowded everything else out, and Harry's head was not organized that way. It was more like Quirrell was a problem he was running in the background while the foreground did other things. He'd been adding data for 3 weeks, the wrongness he'd felt since the first corridor encounter, the classroom incident, the specific quality of the intelligence that had pushed at him through Quirrell's eyes. He was building a picture. The picture had a shape he recognized. He'd read enough, by this point, independent study, Hermione's research, the restricted section note that Flitwick had signed without asking too many questions, to know the shape's name even if he didn't yet know all its details. He got up at 5:30, lit the fire in his sitting room without touching his wand, which was still slightly startling to him when it happened, and sat down with a cup of tea and thought about it. Voldemort had died, partially, the night he'd come for Harry. Harry had known this in a general way since entering the wizarding world, everyone knew it, the fact embedded in the culture like a foundation stone. But Dumbledore had confirmed the more specific version, he wasn't dead in the clean, final sense. He was diminished. Something of him remained, seeking restoration. The layered quality Harry felt from Quirrell was the quality of a man who had something else inside him, and the something else was looking at the Philosopher's Stone the way a drowning person looks at shore. What Harry didn't know yet was exactly what restoration meant. What form it would take. What the stone would give Voldemort if he got it, and whether the thing in Quirrell was strong enough to take the corridor's defenses. He was fairly certain it wasn't. Not yet. The wrongness had been growing steadily since September, but growing and grown were different, and he had some time. He sat with his tea and the fire and the dark window and thought, what would I do if I were Voldemort? The answer came back quickly. He wouldn't wait until he was strong enough to take the corridor by force. He'd look for a faster way. He'd look for leverage. He'd look for a person. Harry set down his tea. He'd been thinking of Quirrell as the threat. But Quirrell was the vessel. The threat was what was in Quirrell, and what was in Quirrell was, at its root, an intelligence. A very old, very patient, very strategic intelligence. And that intelligence would be looking at the castle and the people in it and making calculations. He needed to know more about what those calculations might produce. He picked up his parchment and started writing a list. Hermione found the list at 8 o'clock when she arrived at the East Tower, which she'd started doing in the mornings on days when she had something to report from her research, because going to the library first and then to the tower was geographically efficient and Hermione was deeply committed to geographic efficiency. Harry had started leaving the tower door open in the mornings, which she interpreted correctly as an invitation and had acted on without requiring it to be stated more explicitly than that, which Harry appreciated about her. She came in, set her bag down, accepted the tea Harry poured without being asked, sat down and looked at the list. She read it in about 45 seconds, which Harry had learned was Hermione's baseline reading speed for handwritten material. Then she looked up. You wrote this morning, she said. 5:30. You've been up since 5:30. Not quite a question. 5. The thinking part started at 5. She looked at the list again. He watched her process it. The list was a series of questions rather than conclusions, organized into categories. What does Voldemort need? What is he capable of in his current state? Who in the castle is vulnerable to his influence? What does the stone actually do? The stone, she said, and her voice had the same careful note it had when they'd first talked about Horcruxes, the voice of someone entering territory they knew was serious. I found more about it. Tell me. She put down her tea. She'd brought the notes she'd been keeping in the small, precise handwriting that she used for things she intended to reference repeatedly, neater than her usual work, more compressed. She spread them on the low table between them. Nicholas Flamel, she said. He made it. He's 665 years old. He and his wife have been living on it for centuries. Elixir of life, it produces it. But the more important thing, for our purposes, is what it means for Voldemort. She looked at Harry. If Voldemort drinks the elixir, he gets a body back. A real body. Whatever's happening in Quirrell, sharing the space, whatever that is, it goes away. He gets himself back. Whole. Harry absorbed this. How long has Flamel been letting Dumbledore keep it here? The timing coincides with Voldemort's return to Britain, Hermione said. Which I think is not coincidental. Someone told Flamel that Voldemort was nearby and the stone needed better protection than Flamel's own wards. And Dumbledore brought it here. Yes. She looked at the list again. Your question about who in the castle is vulnerable, I've been thinking about this. Quirrell is obviously already compromised. But Voldemort wouldn't stop at one person. He'd want backup, or insurance. Someone who doesn't know they're being used. Harry nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. The question is how he's doing it. Quirrell he presumably got to before term, before Quirrell came back to Hogwarts. That's not something he can do from inside a turban in a dungeon classroom. No, Hermione agreed. But objects can carry influence. Enchanted objects. Cursed ones. She paused. There's a theory in the restricted section material. I haven't been able to access the specific books, I only got a reference in the index, about objects that can transfer a portion of someone's will. Like a piece of their purpose, encoded in something physical. The word was right there. Harry looked at her. Horcruxes. Hermione went still. You keep coming back to that word. Because I think it's the answer, Harry said. I think that's how he survived. That's what the impression in the hat was. The hat went through my memories and found the memory of Voldemort's killing curse, and in that memory there was a shape. An impression of what the curse hit when it hit me. It hit something that wasn't supposed to be there. He looked at her steadily. I think a piece of Voldemort's soul attached to me when the curse rebounded. The silence that followed was very long. Hermione's face was doing something complicated. He watched her go through the stages: disbelief, calculation, the internal test of logic against logic, and then the slow, reluctant landing of this is consistent with the available information. She hated when the available information led somewhere she didn't want to go. Her face showed that clearly. If that's true, she said carefully, then we have a bigger problem than getting the stone out of the corridor, Harry said. Harry. She looked at him with her most direct look, the one that had no softness in it because softness would be dishonest. If what you're describing is accurate, if there's a fragment of Voldemort's soul in you, it would mean a lot of things, Harry said. I know. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. And she stopped. Looked at him. You're not afraid. I'm concerned, Harry said. There's a difference. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, with the tone of someone committing to a position, we need to find those restricted section books. The ones about Horcruxes. All of them. I don't care what it takes. I know, Harry said. That's the plan. She picked up her notes, organized them with 2 sharp movements, and then sat back and drank her tea and looked at the fire. Harry watched the fire too. Outside, the frost-covered grounds were beginning to catch the early light, everything gray-white and still, the lake a flat mirror. You could have not told me, she said, after a while. About the soul fragment. You could have kept that to yourself. I could have, Harry agreed. Why didn't you? Harry thought about the true answer, which was simple enough. Because you'd have worked it out eventually, he said, and you'd have been annoyed I hadn't told you, and you'd have been right to be annoyed. And also because, he paused, finding the words, I don't want to carry things alone that I don't have to. I've done that. It's not better. Hermione looked at him, and something in her expression went quiet in the way that expressions go quiet when something real has been said. She nodded, once, and went back to her tea. They sat with the fire and the morning light until Ron knocked on the tower door at 8:30 with a bag of scones he'd charmed warm on the way up, because Ron's instinct in nearly every situation was to bring food and he was, Harry thought, almost always right about this. The 3 of them spent the morning in the East Tower going through what they had. It was a different kind of work from their library sessions, less systematic, more like a conversation that was also a problem-solving exercise, the 3 of them passing information and ideas around the way players pass a quaffle, building on each other's contributions with the easy fluency of people who had, in the space of 2 months, learned how each other's minds moved. Ron's contribution was the people reading Harry had told him he was good at, which Ron had been actively deploying since then with the careful attention of someone trying out a newly identified skill. He had observations about Quirrell, specific, granular ones. He never sits with his back to anything. Even in class, he angles the chair. And he doesn't eat in the Great Hall, I mean he comes, but I've never actually seen him eat, have you? Neither Harry nor Hermione had noticed this. And he avoids Snape. Completely. Like physically moves direction when Snape's in the corridor ahead. Snape knows, Harry said immediately. Or suspects. About what's in Quirrell. Snape suspects everything about everyone, Ron said. But yeah, more than that. There's something specific there. Dumbledore suspects too, Harry said. He told me he was monitoring it. What does monitoring mean? Hermione asked. I don't know yet, Harry said. I need to find out. Hermione wrote in her notebook. Ron ate a scone and looked at his notes. He'd started keeping notes, which had surprised all three of them including Ron, and said, "The other thing I've noticed. Quirrell goes up to the third floor on Tuesdays. Between 9 and 10 in the evening. I've seen him twice." Harry and Hermione both looked at him. "You've been following Quirrell?" Hermione said. "Not following, observing," Ron said, with the particular dignity of someone making an important distinction. "I was up there once because I'd gone the wrong way to the Ollery, and he came past me and didn't see me because I'd sat down in an alcove because my feet hurt. And then I went back on purpose to see if it was a pattern." "That's actually very good," Harry said. Ron looked slightly pleased and slightly embarrassed simultaneously. "So what's he doing up there?" "Checking the defenses," Harry said. "Looking for weaknesses. Preparing." "Then we need to know what the defenses are," Hermione said. Harry looked at her. "I already know one of them." Both of them looked at him. "I went up there last week," Harry said. "Not through the main door, through the secondary door I found in September. It connects to a maintenance corridor that runs alongside the guarded section." He paused. "There's a harp. An enchanted harp that plays continuously. And there's something behind the door the harp is guarding." "Something," Ron said. "Something large," Harry said. "And alive. I could hear it breathing." Silence. "A dog," Hermione said slowly. "Hagrid has a dog, or, did you know, I read that Hagrid obtained a three-headed, Fluffy," Harry said. "Yes. I think that's what he calls it. Giant, three-headed dog. The harp keeps it asleep." He looked at them both. "But that's not all. I could feel the layers below it. Not see them, feel them. There are at least 5 more defenses under Fluffy. Different magic, different hands. The other teachers," Hermione said. "Each one put in a defense. That's, actually quite clever. No single person knows the whole sequence except Dumbledore. And Quirrell is trying to work out the sequence," Ron said. "By going up there on Tuesdays." "Yes." A pause. The fire popped. Outside the frost was melting off the grounds, the morning warming slightly, and the distant sound of students moving through the castle drifted up to them. "Harry," Hermione said, and her voice had the careful note again. "What are we going to do about this?" Harry looked at his list. He'd been building toward this question since 5 o'clock that morning. "We need to know what the defenses are," he said. "All of them. Not to take them down, to understand them. Because if Quirrell makes a move, we need to know what we're working with." "And how do we find that out?" "Hagrid knows at least one layer besides Fluffy," Harry said. "He built it, probably. He's not difficult to get information from, Ron, you've talked to him." "He's brilliant," Ron said. "And he talks a lot. He mentioned Fluffy accidentally to me in the first week and then looked like he was going to swallow his own beard." "We talked to Hagrid," Harry said. "Carefully. And I need to get into the restricted section, not through Flitwick. Through someone else." "Snape," Hermione said immediately. Harry looked at her. "You think Snape would sign a note for me?" "I think," Hermione said, with the precise tone of someone who has worked through a theory, "that Snape wants you to survive this year. I don't know why and I don't think it's affection. But I think his interest in your survival is real and specific, and if you go to him with the right framing, he'll calculate that telling you things is more useful than not telling you." Harry thought about this. Snape's layers, dark and old and sedimentary. The way Snape had looked at him, not with simple hostility but with something complicated underneath it. The specific avoidance of the question of house points when there was no house to take them from, the careful choice of no comment over active cruelty in potions. "You might be right," he said. "She's usually right," Ron said, not unhappily. Hagrid's hut at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon was warm in the specific way of places that have been heated by something much larger than a human body, a heat that went beyond the fire and seemed to emanate from the hut itself, like warmth was its natural condition rather than something achieved. Fawn, Hagrid's enormous boarhound, was asleep in the corner in a heap that managed to look both boneless and content. Hagrid had made tea in cups that were roughly the size of soup bowls and put out rock cakes that Ron eyed with the expression of someone who had heard about Hagrid's baking and was recalibrating his expectations. Harry ate a rock cake without complaint, because it was food and Hagrid had made it, and those two facts were sufficient. Hermione nibbled the edge of one with the expression of a scientist examining a specimen. Ron put his in his pocket when Hagrid wasn't looking. "It's good to see you," Hagrid said, settling into his enormous chair with a cup that steamed vigorously. "How are your finding classes?" "Good," Harry said. "Really good." "Flitwick's brilliant." Hagrid beamed. "He's a good man. Good teacher." He looked at Harry with his warm, somewhat anxious expression. Hagrid had looked at Harry with a specific anxiety since the sorting, the anxiety of someone who cared very much and wasn't sure how to help. "And, you're all right? With everything?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "Actually, Hagrid, we wanted to ask you something." Hagrid's expression shifted to something slightly more guarded in the way of a man who was not naturally guarded and found it uncomfortable. "Oh. About Fluffy," Harry said. Hagrid's enormous hands tightened around his cup. "I never told ya, you didn't," Harry said. "I worked it out. I found the secondary corridor. I heard it through the door." He met Hagrid's eyes. "I'm not asking to get past it. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Hagrid looked at him for a long moment. His eyes, small and black and surprisingly sharp, moved from Harry to Ron to Hermione and back. "Ya already know about Fluffy," he said slowly. "Yes. And ya want to know what's under him." "I want to know how it works," Harry said. "Who put what in?" "Not the details, just the structure." Hagrid was quiet. He turned his cup around in his enormous hands. Harry watched him work through it, the conflict between loyalty to Dumbledore's secrecy and the specific form of loyalty he had for Harry, which was older and more personal. He'd known Harry's parents. He'd been the one to bring Harry to the Dursleys, 11 years ago, on Dumbledore's instruction, and Harry could see that sitting on Hagrid even now, a thing he'd never quite put down. "There's several defenses," Hagrid said finally, in a low voice. "Fluffy's mine." He was happy to do it. Fluffy likes having a job. He looked at his tea. "Below that, I don't know all of them. Dumbledore asked each teacher to put something in and keep it between themselves and him. Do you know any of them?" "I know there's something with plants," Hagrid said. "Professor Sprout's work. And something with keys, Flitwick's, I think. And something with chess, which is either a genius idea or a mad one." He paused. "Professor Quirrell put something in too." Harry kept his expression easy. "What?" "I don't know exactly. He said it was a troll." Hagrid looked uncomfortable. "I had some concerns about that, but he's a professor." "I'm not." He stopped. "Why are ya asking about this, Harry?" The direct question. Harry looked at Hagrid and gave him an honest answer, because Hagrid deserved honest answers and also because Hagrid's instincts were very good even when his judgment was imperfect. "Because I think someone is planning to take what's down there," he said. "And I think it's going to happen before the end of term. And I want to understand it before it happens." Hagrid's cup paused halfway to his mouth. "Dumbledore knows," he said. "I know Dumbledore knows," Harry said. "But Dumbledore doesn't tell me things. He gives me pieces when he calculates I need them. I respect that he has his reasons. I'm working with what I can find out independently." Hagrid put the cup down. He looked at Harry with an expression that was frightened and fond and, somewhere underneath both, deeply unsurprised. "Your dad was exactly like this," he said, in a voice that was mostly for himself. "Exactly. Dumbledore would plan something and James would find out half of it sideways and the other half he'd just work out. He shook his head. I'm not supposed to say anything else. You've already been helpful, Harry said. Thank you. Don, thank me, Hagrid said. And Don, go down that corridor, Harry. Whatever you're thinking. Whatever ya feel like ya can handle. He looked at Harry with the full weight of the fondness and the fear. Promise me ya won't go alone. I won't go alone, Harry said. He meant it. Hagrid exhaled. Right. Well. Have another rock cake. Ron retrieved the one from his pocket under the table and put it back on the plate with the practiced motion of someone who'd done this kind of thing before. Harry noticed and didn't say anything. Hermione noticed and also didn't say anything, which was, in its own way, a significant act of friendship. Snape was the harder conversation, and Harry set it up carefully. He went on a Thursday, during Snape's office hours, a formal thing, stated in the course guide, which meant Snape could not claim Harry had ambushed him, and he knocked on the dungeon door and was told to enter in a tone that implied entry was being permitted under protest. The office was deeply cold in the dungeon way and full of pickled things in jars that watched you from their liquid in the unsettling way of things that should no longer be capable of watching but appeared to be managing it anyway. Snape sat behind his desk and looked at Harry with the specific expression he kept for Harry, which was complex in a way that most of Snape's expressions were not. Most of them were simple contempt, clean and easy to read. This one had other things in it that moved underneath. Mr. Potter, he said. I don't encourage social visits. It's not social, Harry said. He sat down in the chair across from the desk without being invited, which he could tell Snape noted. I need information. You should apply to the library. I've read what the library has on the subject, Harry said. I need the restricted section, and I need something more specific than Flitwick's general research note. I need someone who knows the material. He looked at Snape. You know it. Snape was quiet for a moment. His dark eyes did their characteristic thing, a flat surface over deep water, the depth moving without disturbing the surface. What subject, he said. Voldemort, Harry said. The name in Snape's dungeon was different from the name in the library or the corridor. Here it landed differently, not with the jolt of the unfamiliar but with a kind of resonance, like the name had been spoken here before, in different contexts, in different years, by someone Snape had known. Snape's jaw moved, very slightly. Specifically. How he survived. What remains of him and how it works. What it would take to restore him fully and what it would take to finish what my mother started. Harry held Snape's gaze. I know you're watching Quirrell. I know you know what's in him. A silence that was longer than the previous ones. You are 11 years old, Snape said. His voice was strange, not the theatrical contempt of the classroom. Something flatter. More direct. Yes, Harry said. And there's a fragment of Voldemort's soul in my head and another piece of him in my defense professor's turban and the philosopher's stone is 3 floors up and I'd like to be prepared. If that's all right with you. The silence this time was very long. Snape's hands, which had been resting on the desk with deliberate stillness, pressed flat against the surface. Something moved across his face that Harry couldn't identify, something old and complicated and not, for once, about Harry at all. Something that was about a different name, a different year, a different kind of loss. How did you determine? Snape started. The hat showed me the shape of the killing curse's impact, Harry said. And I've been reading. And I can feel it, sometimes. The fragment. He didn't say what it felt like, that was his, still, until he needed to give it away. I might be wrong about the Horcrux specifically. But I'm not wrong about the wrongness. Snape looked at him. The depth moved behind the flat surface. No, he said, quietly. You are not wrong. Harry waited. Snape stood, turned to his bookshelves, and stood with his back to Harry for approximately 10 seconds. Then he said, without turning, the books you need are in the restricted section, north wall, third shelf, behind the potions texts. They will not respond to a general note. You would need a specific spell to access them, Aprio Veritas, on the lock. He paused. I am not suggesting you go to the restricted section without permission. Of course not, Harry said. I am also not signing a note to that effect. I understand, Harry said. Snape turned back around and sat down and looked at Harry with the expression that was complicated in ways Harry couldn't fully read. You said the fragment is in your head, he said. What does it feel like? Harry thought about whether to answer. He answered because Snape had given him something real and deserved the same. Like a room that isn't mine, he said. Like there's a door in the back of a house and you know what's behind it isn't yours but you also know it's there. Snape absorbed this. His expression did something that was almost, but not quite, a wince. The headmaster knows about this? I've told him I think there's something in me from the night Voldemort came for us, Harry said. I didn't use the word Horcrux. I don't think he knows I know that word. And you're telling me? I'm telling you because you already know most of it, Harry said, and because the information is more dangerous ignored than shared with someone who can do something with it. Snape looked at him for a very long moment. The dungeon cold sat around them, the pickled things watched from their jars, the fire in the corner pushed inefficiently against the stone. There is a countermeasure, Snape said finally. The words came out slowly, like they'd had to travel a long way. For a soul fragment. It is not simple. It requires magic of a specific kind, not a spell, exactly. More like a fundamental act of will. Deliberate rejection. But it requires understanding the fragment first. What it is and where it is and what it wants. Tell me about it, Harry said. Not today, Snape said. Come back next week. He paused. And Potter. Harry looked at him. Do not tell the headmaster we spoke about this. Not because I'm doing anything he would object to. But because he has a way of, he stopped. The word he'd been reaching for didn't come, or came and was rejected. Of guiding toward conclusions he's already reached, Harry said. Snape looked at him very strangely. Yes, he said. Precisely that. Harry stood. Same time next week, he said. Thank you, Professor. Snape said nothing. Harry left. In the corridor outside, he stood for a moment in the dungeon cold and thought about what he'd just seen in Snape's face when he'd said Voldemort's name, the resonance, the specific kind of pain that came from long acquaintance. He thought about what it meant that Snape was watching Quirrell and had said nothing to Dumbledore about Harry's knowledge. He thought about the countermeasure and what fundamental act of will meant in practice. He started walking. He had a Quidditch practice in an hour and a defense essay due tomorrow and an East Tower waiting for him at the end of the day, and all of it was real and present and demanding his attention, and the Voldemort problem was a problem but it was also, at the moment, containable. He would keep it contained until he was ready. The incident in the corridor happened on a Friday evening, and Harry did not start it. He was coming back from Flitwick's independent study session, a long one, 2 hours, the two of them working through Charm's theory that was technically fourth-year material and which Harry found genuinely absorbing in the way that things are absorbing when you're finding the architecture of something, and he was taking the long route because the long route went past the windows that looked over the lake and he liked to see it in the evening light. He heard it before he saw it. Voices, 3 of them, with the specific dynamic of 2 voices pressing inward on one. He rounded the corner and found Neville Longbottom backed against the stone wall with Marcus Flint, a Slytherin 5th year, standing 2 feet away from him and a second 5th year flanking, and the shape of it was immediately familiar to Harry in the way of someone who had been in Neville's position many times and knew exactly what that felt like from the inside. Give it back, Neville was saying, and his voice had the quality of someone who had already said this several times without result. He was looking at Flint's hand, where a small glass ball caught the corridor torchlight, a remembrall. When I'm done with it, Flint said, with the bored confidence of a large person being unkind to a small one. Scared, Longbottom? Give him his remembrall, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. He'd rounded the corner and stopped about 8 feet away, and he wasn't loud and he wasn't performing and he wasn't threatening. He was just there, and he said it the way you say the sky is grey today, a fact, not a challenge. Flint turned. He processed Harry, the age, the size, the absence of a house badge, and his expression settled into contempt. Stay out of it, first year. Give him his remembrall and I'll stay out of it, Harry said. And if I don't? Flint took a step toward him. He was 5 years older and half a foot taller and had the broad physical confidence of a person who had settled most arguments this way. Going to report me? To what house? Your non-existent prefect. I wasn't going to report you, Harry said. He kept his voice conversational. I was going to take it from you. Flint stared at him. Then he laughed, the specific laugh of someone who found the idea genuinely absurd. First year with no house thinks he's going to, Harry's hand moved. Later, the second Slytherin fifth year would describe it in the common room as something that shouldn't have been physically possible, not a spell, not a jinx, not anything from the standard curriculum. Just a movement of Harry's hand toward the remembrall, and the remembrall leaving Flint's grip and crossing the 8 feet of corridor between them and settling into Harry's palm with the particular cleanness of something doing what it was supposed to do. It wasn't a summoning charm. Summoning charms made noise and required a wand. Harry's wand was in his pocket. Flint looked at his empty hand. Then at Harry. His expression had gone from contempt to something more genuinely uncertain, which was a significant journey in a short time. Here, Harry said, and turned to Neville and held out the remembrall. Neville took it with the expression of someone who had just watched something happen that they didn't have a category for. Thanks, he said, in a small voice. Harry looked at Flint. Good evening, he said, and walked past him down the corridor. He heard Flint say, behind him, what just, and then nothing intelligible, the conversation behind him losing form as the corridor widened and the distance grew. He walked. The lake windows showed the evening water going dark and gold, and his hand felt slightly warm, and he thought about what he'd just done and whether he knew how he'd done it and concluded honestly that he didn't have the full vocabulary for it yet. He'd wanted the remembrall to come to him and it had come. The magic had understood what he needed and done it. He was going to need to spend some time with that. He also thought, with satisfaction, about Neville's face when the remembrall landed in Harry's hand. The specific expression of someone who had been rescued by an absolute improbability, the kind of rescue that doesn't feel like rescue so much as like the world briefly agreeing to make sense. He'd been that person. He was glad to be the other one for once. He went to the restricted section that night. Not recklessly. He waited until 1 in the morning, when the castle was fully quiet and the corridors moved through their particular nighttime silence, a deeper silence than the days, the stone itself seeming to go still. He'd borrowed his father's invisibility cloak from his trunk, where Dumbledore had put it with a note that said use it well and no other explanation, and which Harry had been carrying like a question he hadn't yet asked. He used it tonight. He moved through the library in the dark to the north wall, third shelf, found the lock Snape had described, small, iron, with the specific feeling of very old magic around it, and said Aprio Veritas in a breath, and the lock opened. The books behind were 3 of them, thin and dark-spined and old in the specific way of things that have been handled rarely and carefully, like objects that carry weight beyond their physical mass. He took the one in the middle, the one his hand went to first, and carried it to the table by the window where moonlight came in without committing to anything, and opened it. He read for 2 hours. What he learned was this: Horcruxes were objects. Pieces of soul, cleaved from the whole by an act of murder and anchored to physical matter. They could survive the death of the body. They could influence the world if placed correctly, in objects, in animals, in, theoretically, people. They could not be destroyed easily. The known methods were either rare or destructive or both. He also learned that a person carrying an unintentional Horcrux, a fragment placed by accident, in the chaos of magical death and rebirth, would experience certain things. Occasional glimpses of the fragment's host consciousness. A capacity to feel things that the fragment had felt. An affinity, sometimes, for certain kinds of magic. Harry looked up from the book. The moonlight was doing its uncommitted thing across the library table. The castle breathed around him, slow and deep. A capacity to feel things the fragment had felt. That was why he could feel Quirrell's wrongness. Not because of some general magical sensitivity, though that was real too, but because the piece of Voldemort inside him recognized the piece of Voldemort in Quirrell. It was two fragments of the same broken thing feeling each other across a room. He sat with this for a long time. Then he closed the book, replaced it, relocked the shelf, put the cloak back on, and moved through the sleeping castle back toward the east tower. The stairs stayed put for him. The corridor torches flickered slightly as he passed, a small acknowledgement. In his sitting room he made tea and sat by the window and didn't look at the lake. He looked at his own hands. There was something in him that was not him. He'd known this, theoretically, since the conversation with Hermione. But sitting in the library with the book open had made it concrete, a fact rather than a theory, a stone rather than a shadow. There was a piece of Tom Riddle in Harry James Potter and it had been there since the night he was a year old. He could feel it, if he looked for it. Not large. Not awake. But there, in the way that a locked door is there, present, defined, taking up space. Harry looked at the door in the back of his mind. Then he thought about what Snape had said. Fundamental act of will. Deliberate rejection. Requires understanding what the fragment is and where it is and what it wants. He understood what it was, now. He knew where it was. What it wanted was restoration, the same thing the rest of Voldemort wanted, the thing that was driving Quirrell up the third-floor corridor on Tuesday nights. Did understanding it mean he was ready for the act of will? Not yet. He was honest with himself about this. He needed to know more. He needed Snape's help, and Hermione's research, and the time to work through it properly. He would not rush this. Rushing it, doing it wrong, could be worse than leaving it contained. He could keep it contained. He was sure of that much. He drank his tea. The fire burned low. Outside the window the November dark pressed at the glass, patient and cold, and the castle kept its slow watch around him, and Harry Potter, 11 years old, with a fragment of the world's most feared dark wizard lodged in the back of his mind like a splinter, made a plan. It was a good plan. It was honest about what he didn't know and decisive about what he did. It had 3 stages and a contingency for each one and a clear understanding of when each stage would need to begin. He wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't afraid of any of it, which was perhaps strange, except that he'd spent 11 years without anything and now he had everything that mattered, a place, a purpose, people, and those things were not taken away by the problem in his head or the problem in the corridor or the ancient dark intelligence pressing at the philosopher's stone from inside a frightened man's turban. He had everything he needed to handle it. He went to bed at 3 in the morning and slept without dreaming, and in the morning Hermione knocked on the tower door with news from her own research that confirmed 3 of the things he'd found and added 2 he hadn't, and Ron arrived 10 minutes later with more scones, and the day began. Outside, November pressed on. The stone walls held. Chapter 5, The Mirror's Answer. December came in sideways, with sleet and wind off the lake that made the castle feel genuinely besieged. The grounds went white and then went gray and the lake froze at the edges, dark water showing through the middle like an eye that wouldn't close. Students moved through the corridors in thicker robes and complained loudly about the weather and the exams and the general unreasonableness of being expected to function in such conditions, and Harry walked through all of it with his collar up and his mind running on the 3 things it had been running on since November. The stone. Quirrell. The fragment in his head. He'd had 2 more sessions with Snape since November, both in the dungeon office with the pickled things watching from their jars. They were strange meetings, not warm, not comfortable, but genuinely useful in the way that things are useful when both parties are being honest about what they need and what they have. Snape taught the way he never taught in class, without performance, without contempt, just information, precise and delivered at the speed Harry could absorb it, which was faster than Snape had clearly expected, and which had produced in Snape the particular response of a man recalibrating an assumption. The fragment, Snape had said, in their second meeting, responds to strong emotion. Specifically, to strong negative emotion, rage, fear, hatred. These are the conditions it was created in. These are the conditions it is accustomed to feeding on. He'd looked at Harry over his desk. You do not appear to experience strong negative emotion in the standard way. No, Harry had said. This is protective, Snape had said. Possibly the most protective thing about you, though I doubt anyone has told you that. Harry had thought about the years of the Dursleys, the years of learning to put distance between himself and the things being thrown at him, not as a coping mechanism exactly but as survival, the simple practical maintenance of a self that wasn't going to be erased by other people's noise. No, he'd said. No one's told me that. Snape had been quiet for a moment, and then they'd continued. What Harry had learned, the fragment could be isolated. Not destroyed, not yet, that was the larger problem, the one that required more information than either of them currently had, but contained more deliberately, held further back, behind a wall rather than just a door. The technique Snape described was not a spell but a practice, something closer to meditation than magic, a daily act of mental architecture that Harry had been doing every morning since, sitting in the East Tower window with his tea and the grey December light, building the wall one careful stone at a time. It was working. He could feel it working. The fragment was still there but quieter, like a fire with less oxygen, the consciousness behind it still present but less intrusive. He thought about this sometimes with a kind of dark interest, the piece of Voldemort in him going quieter as Voldemort's other piece, in Quirrell, grew louder. They were moving in opposite directions. He didn't know yet what that meant for the endgame. Hermione had found the thing about the mirror. She'd been moving through the restricted section texts with the systematic precision that made her Hermione, building her understanding of the stone and its surroundings in careful layers, and she'd found a reference in a very old text about the Hogwarts inventory, not a magical text, just an administrative record, the kind of document that exists because institutions require documentation and documentation accumulates over centuries, to an object in storage that had been moved from the archive to an active location in early September. The object was described as a very large mirror, and the notation said, relocated per headmaster's instruction, East Wing, disused 7th floor classroom. He put it near the stone, Hermione had said, in the East Tower, spreading her notes on the table. Or near the path to the stone. I don't know if it's a defense or a tool or, what is it? Harry had asked. I don't know yet, she'd said. But the mirror has a name. The Mirror of Erist. And there's a text, a very old one, almost allegorical in style, that describes it as showing the viewer the deepest, most desperate desire of their heart. She'd looked at Harry. Not what they want. What they need to want. The thing that defines the shape of their longing. Harry had thought about this. That sounds dangerous. People have been known to waste away in front of it, Hermione had said. Just, stop eating, stop sleeping. Sit in front of it until, she'd stopped. Dumbledore must be using it somehow. Either as a defense or as a test. Harry had thought, or as a lure. The stone was what Voldemort needed most. If the mirror showed you your deepest desire, and the stone was Voldemort's deepest desire, then what would Voldemort see if he looked into it? The question had been sitting in the back of his mind for 2 weeks, patient, waiting for him to have enough information to do something with it. He thought he had enough now. He went on a Sunday, in the quiet hours between midnight and 2, with the invisibility cloak and the castle's cooperation and 3 weeks of working out the path. The 7th floor corridor was empty and cold, the torches burning low in their brackets, and the disused classroom was exactly where Hermione's research said it would be, a door slightly different from the others, older, with the feeling of something behind it that was paying attention in a way that rooms normally didn't. He opened the door. The room was empty except for the mirror. It was enormous. Floor to ceiling, ornate framed, gold that had gone greenish with age, with an inscription along the top that Harry had to look at sideways to read, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. He looked at it for a moment, working it backward. I show not your face but your heart's desire. Right. Hermione had said that. He looked at the mirror. The figure looking back at him was himself, which he'd expected, but the context of the reflection was different, not this cold empty room but somewhere else, somewhere outside, open ground, and he was standing with people. His first instinct was that the people were his parents, which he'd braced for, the obvious reading of what an orphan's deepest desire should be. But it wasn't his parents. It was him, standing on open ground, and the people around him were, everyone. Not a specific everyone. Not a list of faces. Just the quality of everyone, people who knew him and chose to be there, and the him in the mirror was not performing anything. Not being careful, not calculating the distance, not weighing what was safe to say. Just standing in the middle of people who were there because they wanted to be, openly, in the daylight, with nothing required of him except his presence. He stood in front of the mirror for about 30 seconds. Then he said, quietly, to the reflection, right. I know. He meant it not as dismissal but as acknowledgement. He knew what he wanted. He'd known it, in some form, since the train, since Ron had said wicked and Hermione had taken notes and the castle had opened its corridors to him and the hat had spoken his truth out loud in front of everyone. He was building toward it. It was not something he needed a mirror to show him. He turned away from the mirror. And nearly walked directly into Dumbledore. The headmaster was standing in the doorway, and for once his expression was entirely unguarded, surprise, and something else, something that processed Harry standing in front of the mirror and turning away from it in 30 seconds and reorganized itself in real time. Harry, Dumbledore said. Professor, Harry said. He kept the cloak in his hands. I imagine you were expecting someone else. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. He came into the room slowly, looking at the mirror, and then back at Harry. I placed this mirror here, he said, as one of the defenses. I know, Harry said. How does it work? Dumbledore asked, and Harry understood that he was being tested, not maliciously, but carefully, Dumbledore still mapping him, still taking his measurements. It shows what you most desire, Harry said. And if what you most desire is the stone itself, the stone appears in your pocket without you being able to use it. You get it but can't use it. He looked at Dumbledore. It's brilliant, actually. Voldemort would see himself restored, powerful, body back, and reach into the mirror and pull out the stone, but be able to do nothing with it because his desire is to use it rather than just have it. Dumbledore's expression was doing the thing it did when Harry was further ahead than Dumbledore's planning had accounted for. Yes, he said. That is exactly how it works. But it also means, Harry said, that anyone who does not desire the stone for personal gain could use it. Could take it out of the mirror and do what they wanted with it, because their desire is not to use it but to prevent someone else from using it. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Which is a flaw. Dumbledore was quiet. If Quirrell figures that out, Harry said. Or if whatever's guiding Quirrell figures it out, and it will figure it out, it's very old and very intelligent, then the mirror stops being a defense and becomes an instruction manual. Dumbledore sat down on a windowsill that wasn't particularly designed for sitting on but which he made look intentional. He looked at Harry with an expression that had shed every register of performance, no warmth, no management, no careful calculation. Just a man thinking. What would you suggest, he said. The question was genuine. Harry could hear it. Move the stone, Harry said. Not to another room in Hogwarts. Out. Back to Flamel, or somewhere else that isn't connected to a school full of children and a compromised defense professor. He paused. I know you think Hogwarts is the safest place. But the safest place stops being safe when the enemy is already inside it. Dumbledore looked at him. If I move the stone, and Voldemort knows it's been moved, he may take more drastic action. He's already taking action, Harry said. Quirrell is up on the 3rd floor every Tuesday. The defenses are being assessed. The timeline is not long. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. You're trying to contain a problem and hope it resolves. It won't resolve. It's going to come to a head before the end of term, and when it does, it's better if the thing he's coming for isn't here. And if he comes for something else? Dumbledore said. If removing the stone removes the only reason he has not yet made a more direct move. What would a more direct move be? Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, and Harry looked back, and the mirror stood between them reflecting nothing it had been asked to reflect, just the two of them in the cold room, the gap in the conversation holding the shape of what neither of them had said yet. A more direct move would be coming for Harry. Then he comes for me, Harry said. And I'll deal with that. Dumbledore's expression was strange. You say that very calmly. What's the alternative? Being afraid of it? Harry looked at the mirror. He already tried to kill me once. And whatever he was when he did that, the piece of it that's left could feel what he's become. He's not what he was. And he stopped. Reached for the right word. I'm not what he's expecting. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. Outside the windows the December dark pressed against the glass and the sleet had stopped and the grounds were white and still. I will consider moving the stone, Dumbledore said finally. Will you give me a week? You have less than that, Harry said. I think you know that. I do, Dumbledore said. And then, quietly, I want to tell you something, Harry. Something I should have told you earlier, and didn't, because I was managing. As you've noted that I do. Harry waited. The prophecy, Dumbledore said. The relevant portion. He closed his eyes briefly. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. He opened his eyes. The power he knows not, he said, looking at Harry. I spent years assuming I knew what that power was. I was, I think, quite wrong. Harry thought about the mirror. About what he'd seen and turned away from in 30 seconds. About Ron's scones and Hermione's notes and the castle that kept his doors and the hat that had refused to diminish him. Love, he said, not because it was the expected answer but because he'd been thinking about it since he'd found the mirror text, and the word he kept landing on was that one, though not in the form most people meant it. Not the sentimental kind. The structural kind. The kind that means you're doing this for something outside yourself. The kind that makes you not afraid, because being afraid would be about you, and this isn't about you. Dumbledore looked at him and his eyes were very bright and this time they matched his expression, all the way through. Yes, he said. Yes. That is exactly it. They sat in the cold room with the mirror between them for another few minutes. Then Dumbledore rose. I'll escort you back to your tower, he said. And tomorrow, Harry, come see me tomorrow afternoon. There are things I should have told you earlier and I'd like to begin remedying that. All right, Harry said. They walked back through the quiet castle and Dumbledore said nothing more and Harry said nothing more and the castle moved around them, slow and deep, and somewhere 3 floors below, Harry felt the wrongness of Quirrell in his distant room like a tuning fork hit against stone, vibrating at the frequency of something that was close, now. That was almost ready. He filed it. Tomorrow. The conversation with Dumbledore tomorrow. And then what came next? The conversation with Dumbledore the next afternoon was the most honest conversation Harry had had with him, which meant it was partially honest, but more partially than before, and Harry took that as progress. Dumbledore told him about the night his parents died, more than he'd told him before, the specific details of what had happened at Godric's Hollow, the rebound of the curse, the way Voldemort's body had been destroyed but his soul, anchored to the fragments he'd placed throughout his life, had survived as something between spirit and will. He told him about the years of diminishment, the wandering, and his return to Britain earlier that year, drawn by the stone's proximity. He did not tell Harry about the other Horcruxes. Harry suspected he knew about them, or some of them, but was not yet certain, and certainty was, for Dumbledore, a prerequisite for disclosure. Harry noted this and said nothing. He had his own information on that front, from Snape's sessions and the restricted section reading. He did tell Harry about Lily's sacrifice. More specifically this time, not just blood protection but the mechanism of it, the nature of what his mother's love had done, the way it had embedded itself in Harry's skin like a second soul, a presence that was all warmth and no weight. Harry listened to this and felt something move in him that was not the fragment and not his own magic but something quieter and more fundamental, something that had been there since the beginning and that the mirror had shown him the shape of. He didn't cry. He felt the thing fully and let it be what it was without needing to perform it. Dumbledore, watching him, said very gently, "You're not going to cry." "I'm feeling it," Harry said. "That's the same thing, I think. Just quieter." Dumbledore looked at him and then away, toward his window, toward the white grounds below. "She was extraordinary," he said, and this time the warmth in his voice was entirely real, both registers of it, all the way through. "Your mother." "I know," Harry said. "I can feel her sometimes. In the protection." He looked at his hands. "It's not sad, exactly. It's more like, she's still here. In a way. In what she left." Dumbledore said nothing. The fire crackled. Fawkes shifted on his perch and sang one low note, brief and sweet, and the room was very still. "Will you move the stone?" Harry asked. "I'll make arrangements this week," Dumbledore said. He turned back from the window. "You're right that the timeline is short. And you're right that the enemy being inside changes the calculus." He paused. "I want to ask you something, Harry." "Go ahead. When it comes, and I believe you're right that it will come this term, I want you to promise me that you'll come to me first. That you won't face it alone." Harry looked at him. "I'll come to you," he said. "But I want the same from you. When you know something I should know, you tell me. No managing." Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment. "Agreed," he said. Harry thought he meant it. He thought he meant it as much as Dumbledore was capable of meaning it, which was partly but genuinely, which was more than nothing. 3 days later, Dumbledore left the school. The owl arrived at breakfast, a ministry owl with official ribbons, and Dumbledore read the letter at the head table with an expression that didn't change and stood and said to McGonagall, quietly enough that only the nearest students heard, that he was needed in London urgently and would return by the evening. Harry heard it from Hermione, who had been close enough to catch it, and felt the wrongness of Quirrell's spike immediately, sharply, like a frequency doubling. Across the great hall he watched Quirrell's reaction. The man had gone very still, and then very deliberately, casually continued eating, and the deliberateness of the continuation was the tell. Harry put down his fork. "He's going tonight," he said quietly. Ron and Hermione both looked at him. "Quirrell," Harry said. "The owl. Dumbledore leaving. It's not a coincidence, someone sent that owl. Someone who knew Dumbledore's leaving would be the signal." Hermione's face went through its rapid processing sequence. "But Dumbledore said he'd be back by evening." "That doesn't matter," Harry said. "Even a few hours is enough. The tunnel under Fluffy, the gauntlet of defenses, if Quirrell's been studying them for 3 months, he might be able to move through them quickly." He looked at her. "We need to go tonight." "Go where?" Ron said, and his voice was steady in the way it got when things were serious, not fearless, but decided. "3rd floor," Harry said. "We need to get there first." Hermione looked at him with an expression he'd come to know, not the arguing expression, not the calculating one, but the third one, the one that appeared when she was afraid and committed simultaneously. "You said you wouldn't go alone." "I'm not going alone," Harry said. He looked at both of them. "I need you to be honest with me right now. You don't have to come." What's down there it's serious. And I can handle it, but I don't know everything that's going to be in that corridor, and there are going to be things that need more than one person. Ron picked up his pumpkin juice, drank it, put it down. Giant chess, he said. Hagrid said there was giant chess. Yes, Harry said. Right, Ron said. I'm coming. Hermione had been looking at the space between the two of them with an expression that was making rapid decisions. The Devil's Snare is Sprouts, she said. I know about Devil's Snare. It's in our herbology curriculum. She picked up her bag. I'm coming. Harry looked at them both, Ron, steady and decided, Ron who noticed people and trusted instincts and would not flinch from a difficult thing because leaving a friend to face it alone was simply not something Ron Weasley was capable of. Hermione, who had been afraid in 3 recognizable ways since he'd met her and had never once let the fear stop her from doing what was right. Tonight, Harry said. After midnight. They assembled in the East Tower at midnight with the invisibility cloak, Hermione's bag packed with the things she determined would be useful, and Ron with his wand and the look of someone who has decided on a thing and is not going to think about it too hard between now and when it needs to happen. Harry had spent the evening in deliberate calm, which was not the same as not feeling things. He'd felt plenty, the sharpening clarity of the fragment in his head responding to whatever was occurring in Quirrell, like a compass needle swinging toward a pole, and beneath that the steady background warmth of his mother's protection, and beneath that the thing the mirror had shown him, the thing he was doing this for. He'd built the wall higher and then he'd let himself feel the warmth and then he'd gotten his cloak and gone to meet his friends. Ready, he said. No, Ron said. Going anyway. Yes, Hermione said. Let's be quick. They went. The castle was different at midnight in a way that had nothing to do with the dark, something about the quality of its attention, the way it acknowledged them as they moved. Harry felt it clearly now, the way he always did at night, the pulse of old stone and older magic. The staircases kept still. The right doors opened. The 3rd floor was cold in the way of places not often inhabited, the air sitting undisturbed, and the door to the corridor was open. Not the main door, that was still closed. The secondary door, the one Harry had found in September. Open, just slightly, and through the gap the sound of the harp playing, and beneath it something large breathing in the arrhythmic way of something between sleep and waking. Fluffy, Ron said, very quietly. Someone's already here, Harry said. He pushed the door fully open and they went through. The 3-headed dog was enormous and barely awake, its 3 great heads drooping, its breath coming in enormous gusts that stirred the air in the chamber. The harp played in the corner, an enchanted thing, small and plain and devoted to its work. The trapdoor in the floor was open, darkness below it, and from the darkness came a sound that was not quite a sound, the way some presences are not quite presences, the way some things announce themselves below the threshold of ordinary hearing. They went down. The Devil's Snare was first. They dropped into darkness and immediately the snare was there, pale, grasping, the kind of plant that feels like a bad idea about the future, wrapping around ankles and wrists in the way of something patient and experienced. Hermione said Lumos Solum and the light burst out warm and fierce and the snare recoiled fast, pulling back from all 3 of them with the haste of something allergic to the situation. Lovely, Ron said, looking at the retreating vines. It responds to warmth and light, Hermione said, stepping forward. Don't fight it, that makes it grip harder. Just, relax, Harry said. I wasn't going to say relax, Hermione said. But that's what you meant. It's what I meant, she admitted. They moved forward. The keys were second, an enormous room full of winged keys, hundreds of them, fluttering in the dark like a confused flock, and one of them somewhere that matched the door on the far wall. 3 broomsticks leaned against the wall, and Harry looked at the mass of keys with the same quality of attention he brought to a Quidditch problem, 3 dimensions, pattern recognition, the logic of what makes one thing different from another when all the things are superficially the same. It took him 40 seconds. The one he was looking for had a slightly bent wing, a repair that hadn't quite taken, and it was flying differently from the others because of it, a subtle list to the left in its loop, barely perceptible, but perceptible. He was on the broom and had it in 10 seconds after that, the key shrieking in his grip, and the door opened, and they moved. Ron's face when he saw the chess board was the face of someone who had been handed something they were specifically qualified to do and knew it immediately. "I've got this," he said, before Harry or Hermione could speak. The chess pieces were as tall as humans, white marble streaked with silver, occupying 3/4 of the massive room with the absolute authority of things that have always been exactly where they are. The black pieces on the far side looked at them with the dispassionate attention of chess pieces, which is very dispassionate indeed. Ron walked the board with his eyes. Harry watched him do it, the same look Ron got when he was noticing people, except turned on a strategic problem, and Harry had told Ron he was good at this and Ron had been practicing with it since, and here it was, the practice paying back. "We play across," Ron said. "Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, you're a castle. I'm a knight." He looked at them. "Do what the pieces tell you. When they move, you move. When they take, step back." "What about you?" Hermione asked. "I'm the knight," Ron said. "Knights get taken." He said it with perfect equanimity, which Harry thought was one of the most genuinely brave things he had ever heard. The game was brilliant and it was fast and Ron played it like someone who had been playing chess since he could hold a piece, which he had been, which was the beautiful thing about Ron Weasley. He'd always had this, the strategic mind and the spatial logic and the pattern recognition, and it had never had a stage before because no one had put him on one. Harry moved where he was told and Hermione moved where she was told and Ron played his pieces and the black pieces fell one by one, and then Ron looked at the board and said, very calmly, "I need to sacrifice myself." "Ron," Hermione started. "Check," Ron said. "If I go there, it's checkmate." "But they'll take me." He looked at Harry. "Go. When they take me, run. You'll have a clear line." Harry looked at him. Ron looked back with the expression of someone who had made the decision already and was simply communicating it. "I'll get you out," Harry said. "When this is done." "I know you will," Ron said. "Now go." Ron moved his knight. The White Queen took him with a violence that made Hermione make a sharp sound and Harry take 2 involuntary steps forward before stopping himself. Ron hit the ground and lay still and Harry looked at the board and the board looked back at him and there was a straight line to the king and Harry walked it with his heart doing something loud in his chest and said, "Checkmate." The black pieces stopped moving. The far door clicked open. Harry turned back to Ron, who was breathing, alive, conscious, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. "Did we win?" Ron said. "You won," Harry said. "Stay still." "Hermione, stay with him." Hermione was already kneeling beside Ron. She looked up at Harry with an expression that was afraid and trusting in equal measure. "Be careful," she said, and it was the most honest 2 words she'd said to him in 3 months. "Always," Harry said, and went through the door. The troll was already unconscious, which meant Quirrell had already been through, which meant Harry was behind. He moved quickly through the chamber and through the next, which was Snape's, a logic puzzle, 7 bottles, a riddle in verse on the wall. He read it once, solved it in 2 minutes, took the bottle that allowed forward passage, went through. The final chamber was underground and high-ceilinged and lit with a purple fire that burned without heat, and in front of the mirror of Eriste stood Quirinus Quirrell. He was still. He'd been still long enough that Harry could see the quality of the stillness, not Quirrell's stillness, not the stillness of a frightened man trying to compose himself, but the stillness of the thing inside Quirrell, ancient and absolute, the predator's patience of something that had been waiting for this for months. "I wondered when you'd arrive," Quirrell said. Not the stutter. The voice that had spoken in the classroom, smooth, cold, old. Harry walked into the chamber and stopped about 15 feet away. He looked at the mirror. The mirror showed nothing he could see from this angle, he was behind it, looking at the back of the frame, the inscription backward from here. He looked at Quirrell. "Where's the stone?" Harry said. "In the mirror," Quirrell said. "I've been unable to retrieve it." He turned, slowly, and his eyes had the depth again, the deep water darkness. "The enchantment is frustratingly clever. I look into it and I see what I want, myself, restored, powerful, supreme, but the stone does not come. The stone is apparently reserved for someone who wants it for other reasons." He looked at Harry. "Someone like you, perhaps." "I'm not getting it for you," Harry said. "No," Quirrell agreed. "I don't expect you will." He tilted his head. "I've been thinking about you, Harry Potter. Since September. Since the classroom, when you met my other self's attention and didn't flinch. That was unexpected." He paused. "He wants to speak with you directly." "He can," Harry said. Quirrell's hands moved to his turban. Slowly, unwinding it. Harry watched without moving, without his expression changing, as the turban came free and Quirrell turned his back to the mirror, and there, on the back of Quirrell's head, was a face. It was barely a face. White, flat, with red eyes, like a face that a sculptor had left unfinished, the suggestion of what it would be if given time and material. But the eyes were real. The eyes were fully present, fully alive, and they fixed on Harry with the quality of something that had been looking for something for a very long time and had found it. Harry looked back. The pressure came immediately, the same pressure from the classroom, the same ancient cold intelligence, except this time it was not testing. This time it was everything, the full weight of what was left of Voldemort, compressed and concentrated and aimed at Harry with the absolute intention of something that had survived by will alone for years. It pressed at every edge of him, looking for a place to enter, looking for a crack, looking for the fear that should have been there, the small animal response of a child finding the monster in the dark. Harry stood in it the way he'd stood in the castle wind on the Quidditch pitch. He let it come and found his edges and held them. "Remarkable," the face on the back of Quirrell's head said, in a voice that was neither Quirrell's nor anyone living's. "You don't fear me." "No," Harry said. "Everyone fears me." "You've spent years being afraid of a baby," Harry said. "I think fear travels both directions." The red eyes were very still. "You know what you are," the voice said. "The fragment. I can feel it in you. My own property." "No," Harry said. The word was clean. "Just that. It is a piece of my soul. It's in my head," Harry said. "That makes it mine to deal with. Not yours." He looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, direct, without flinching, seeing. "You're looking for a body. That's what the stone is for. You're looking to undo what happened when you came for my family." He paused. "You keep coming back to my family, which I find interesting." "Your mother," the voice said, and for the first time there was something in it that was not cold. Something that was almost recognition. Almost respect, of a very specific, very terrible kind. "She was more powerful than you," Harry said simply. "And it cost you everything. And now you're sharing someone else's head and you've spent 3 months trying to get through a dog and some teacher's protections and you haven't managed it." "I will manage it," the voice said. "Maybe," Harry said. "But not tonight." He turned to the mirror. The mirror showed him what it had shown him before, open ground, the quality of everyone, himself standing in the middle of it with nothing required of him except presence. He looked at it and understood what he needed and understood that what he needed was not the stone in his pocket. What he needed was for Voldemort to not have it. He put his hand to the mirror. The stone appeared in his palm. Small, red, impossibly warm for its size, heavier than it should have been. It sat in his hand and he felt the magic of it, the deep, old, life-sustaining magic, patient as geology, nothing like the sharp bright magic of a wand but something older, the kind of magic that was woven into the structure of things rather than imposed on top of them. He looked at it. He looked at Quirrell. He thought about what Dumbledore had said. The power he knows not. He thought about what Snape had said, fundamental act of will, deliberate rejection. He thought about what the mirror had shown him and why it had shown him that specifically, what it meant that his deepest desire was not possession or power or even safety but simply being fully, openly, in the company of people who were there because they wanted to be. Voldemort's deepest desire was restoration, domination, the ordering of the world according to his own architecture. The stone had come to Harry and not to Voldemort because Harry didn't want what Voldemort wanted. He wanted something the stone couldn't give and couldn't take away. He closed his fingers around the stone. "I'll put it somewhere you can't reach," he said to the face on the back of Quirrell's head. "And then I'm going to deal with the fragment in my head and every other piece of you that's out there, and I'm going to do it properly, and I'm going to do it on my own terms. Not because of a prophecy. Not because someone arranged for me to." He looked at the red eyes directly. "Because you came from my family. And I'm someone who takes that personally." The pressure came back, harder, faster, full force, and this time it had something new in it. Not a test. Genuine attempt. The full will of what remained of Voldemort, throwing itself at Harry with the desperation of something that was running out of time and knew it, and Harry felt it hit and felt his own edges and felt beneath his edges the warmth that had been there since the night his mother died, the warmth that was not his own magic but hers, woven into him like a foundation stone, and the two things, Voldemort's will and Lily's protection, hit each other at the place where Harry stood. What happened next was not a spell. It wasn't a fight, exactly, not in any way that had a physical shape. It was more like a resolution, two forces that could not occupy the same space at the same time meeting at a boundary and finding the boundary firm. Harry felt the impact of it everywhere, in his teeth and his bones and the room at the back of his mind where the fragment was, and the fragment, Voldemort's piece, lodged in him since infancy, the soul shard that had been growing quieter since November, responded to the collision by trying to flare, trying to open, and Harry met it with the wall he'd been building every morning in the East Tower window, stone by stone, for 6 weeks. "No," he said to it, "not in words, in will. Not now. Not yet." The fragment pressed. Harry pressed back. Quirrell screamed. It was a terrible sound, not pain exactly, or not only pain, but the sound of something losing its hold on a thing it had been holding, the shriek of separation. Quirrell's hands reached for Harry and made contact with his arm and then pulled back, the skin where he'd touched going white and then dark and then crumbling in a way that was wrong, in a way that Harry had no word for. The touch, Lily's protection in Harry's skin meeting Voldemort's possession of Quirrell's body, was burning through Quirrell like water through paper. Harry stepped back. Quirrell collapsed to his knees. The face on the back of his head was changing, losing coherence, the suggestion of features becoming less suggested, becoming less, becoming a vapor, something without shape pulling away from the body it had been borrowing, and the red eyes found Harry one last time. "This," the voice said, very quietly, "is not the end." "No," Harry said. "It's not." The vapor rose. It moved toward the door, past Harry, and Harry felt it pass, felt the cold of it, the presence of it, the specific signature of something ancient and diminished and furious, and his mother's warmth rose in him like a tide and the cold moved through and was gone. Quirrell collapsed fully. He was breathing, barely, and the chamber was very quiet. Harry opened his hand and looked at the stone. Still warm. Still impossibly heavy for its size. He stood alone in the purple-lit chamber with the mirror showing him something he didn't look at, and the stone in his hand, and the echo of Voldemort's passage still in the air, and he felt, not triumphant. Not afraid. Something more like the feeling he'd had in the East Tower window on the first night. The feeling of solid ground. He tucked the stone into his pocket. He went back through the chambers, the logic puzzle, the troll, the chess room. Ron was sitting up when Harry came through, his color back, Hermione beside him with her hand on his arm. They both looked up when Harry appeared. "Done?" Ron said. "Done," Harry said. "For now." He helped Ron up. The three of them walked back through the devil's snare and the key chamber and up through the trapdoor and past the sleeping Fluffy and out through the secondary door, and the castle wrapped around them as they moved, the warmth of it steady and present, and Harry kept his hand in his pocket around the stone and thought about what for now meant. It meant Voldemort was gone but not finished. It meant there were other Horcruxes and a longer reckoning ahead. It meant tonight was a beginning, not an end, and that beginning had been done right, with friends, with preparation, with full understanding of what was at stake and a complete refusal to be diminished by it. He could work with that. He could work with all of it. Chapter 6, What Cannot Be Sorted. Harry woke up in the hospital wing. This was not surprising. What was surprising was that he felt fine, not the cotton wool, distant from herself fine of someone whose body had been through something and was being kept comfortable by medical magic, but genuinely, cleanly fine, the way you feel after a long sleep following a difficult week. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling, which was high and white and lit by the particular pale December light of a morning that hadn't yet committed to being cold or grey or anything, and thought, stone. His hand went to his pocket. Empty, which meant either the robes he was wearing weren't his original ones or someone had taken the stone while he slept, and given that Dumbledore was sitting in the chair beside his bed reading a letter, he suspected the latter. "Good morning," Dumbledore said, without looking up. "You took the stone," Harry said. "I did." Dumbledore folded the letter and looked at him with the expression that Harry had come to read as his most honest one, the expression that appeared when Dumbledore had spent time alone processing something and had arrived at a position he believed in. "It has been sent back to Nicholas Flamel. He will destroy it." He paused. "He and his wife will die, in time, without the elixir. They have had enough time." Nicholas agreed. Harry thought about 600 years. About what it meant to hold a life that long and then let it go because it was the right thing. "He must be an extraordinary person," he said. "He is," Dumbledore said. "As are you." Harry looked at the ceiling. "How long was I out?" "A day and a half," Dumbledore said. "It is Thursday morning. Your friends have been in and out, Madame Pomfrey has been managing the traffic. She's a firm believer in rest, though I suspect she underestimated the persistence of Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger." He paused. "Ron has a broken collarbone, which is healing well. He played that chess game extraordinarily." "He did," Harry said. "He sacrificed himself without being asked." "He was asked by the situation," Harry said. "He recognized it. That's the same as doing it on his own." He pushed himself up to sitting. The hospital wing was empty except for them, the row of white beds running the length of the room, the high windows showing the white December grounds. "What happened to Quirrell?" Dumbledore's expression did something careful. "He is alive," he said. "He is in St. Mungo's." The separation, from what had been inhabiting him, was violent. "He will recover physically." He paused. "Whether he recovers fully is a longer question." "And Voldemort?" "Gone," Dumbledore said. "In the sense that he was gone before, diminished, bodiless, present somewhere in the world but without a foothold. He will seek another." He looked at Harry. "You know this?" "Yes," Harry said. "The Horcruxes." He said the word plainly. Dumbledore was still. "You know that word," he said. "Not a question." "I've known it since October," Harry said. "Snape helped me understand the specifics. I've read the restricted section texts." He looked at Dumbledore. "You should have told me." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the corner crackled. Outside the window someone was crossing the grounds, a small figure in dark robes, moving toward the greenhouses. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I should have." "How many are there?" Harry asked. "I believe 6, Dumbledore said. He said it with the tone of a man who has been carrying a weight in private and has decided, finally, to set it down in front of someone. 6 objects, each containing a fragment of his soul. They must all be destroyed before Voldemort can be truly finished. I have spent years searching for them. Have you found any? One, Dumbledore said. I destroyed it the summer before your first year. He held up his right hand and Harry saw, for the first time, that the hand was darkened and faintly wrong-looking, the skin too tight and too dark in the specific way of a wound that had been treated but not fully healed. There was a cost. Harry looked at the hand and then at Dumbledore's face. Is it going to kill you? He asked directly. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. Eventually, he said. There are measures. But the poison in it will spread, in time, despite the measures. I have, some years yet. But not unlimited years. Harry processed this. He felt it, not as panic, not as despair, but as a fact that changed the shape of things. Dumbledore was not going to live forever. The plan that depended on Dumbledore's guidance had a timeline problem. Then we need to find the others faster, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression Harry had come to think of as the real one, everything else stripped away, just the man, just the mind, just whatever was true. Yes, he said. We do. Tell me what you know, Harry said. All of it. Not when you think I'm ready. Now. A pause. The fire crackled. All right, Dumbledore said. He talked for 2 hours. Harry listened the way he listened to everything important, not passively, actively, pulling apart the information and turning it over, asking questions when something didn't add up, noting the gaps. Dumbledore told him about Tom Riddle, the orphan, the brilliant, frightening boy who had come to Hogwarts and mapped the boundaries of his own power with the systematic focus of someone who had decided that power was the only reliable answer to a world that had been unreliable. Harry listened to the story of Tom Riddle and heard, underneath it, a story he recognized, the shape of a child who had been told they were nothing, who had found something that told them otherwise, and who had made a very different decision about what to do with that information than Harry had. He didn't say this. He held it. Dumbledore told him about the Horcruxes he believed existed, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring already destroyed, a snake named Nagini, and the diary that had been in Lucius Malfoy's possession, which Dumbledore believed had been used in a way he was still investigating. He told him about the specific magic involved in their destruction, the methods that worked and the methods that didn't, the particular difficulty of finding objects that had been hidden for decades by someone who was very good at hiding things. And then Dumbledore paused, and looked at his darkened hand, and said, "There is one more thing." Harry waited. "The 7th Horcrux," Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry with the most careful look Harry had ever seen on his face, more careful than the managing, more careful than the warmth. The look of a man who was about to say something he had spent years not saying and had not yet found a way to say that felt anything other than what it was. I believe, and I want to be honest with you, this is a belief, not a certainty, that when Voldemort's curse rebounded on the night of your parents' murder, it created an unintended 7th Horcrux. Me, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes. I know, Harry said. The silence was different from the other silences in their conversation. This one had weight. This one had the specific weight of something that had been kept in a box for a very long time and was now in open air, and air changed it. You know, Dumbledore said. Since October, Harry said. The hat showed me the shape of it when it was sorting me. And then I read, and I confirmed it, and I've been working on the specific question of what to do about it with Snape for 6 weeks. Dumbledore looked at him. With Severus. He knew you wouldn't tell me directly, Harry said. And he calculated that telling me was more useful than protecting me from knowing. He paused. He was right. Dumbledore was very still. Then, slowly, he said, "And what have you and Severus determined? About what to do about it?" "That it can be separated from me," Harry said. "Without killing me. That the method requires magic of a fundamental kind, a deliberate, complete act of rejection at the moment of Voldemort's destruction. When he dies, truly dies, the final piece of his soul in me will look for somewhere to go. If I reject it fully, with full understanding and full will, it will have nowhere to go, and it will dissolve. He looked at Dumbledore. I don't have to die for that to happen. Dumbledore's hands pressed flat on his thighs. You're certain. Snape is certain. I've read the theory. The books in the restricted section describe this exact mechanism. He held Dumbledore's gaze. The conclusion you've been building toward, the one you weren't going to tell me until you thought I was ready, involves me walking to my death willingly. Doesn't it? The silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. Very quietly. That's wrong, Harry said. You were wrong about that. Not with bad intentions, I know you weren't doing it maliciously. But wrong. He kept his voice even because being even about this was important, because being furious would feel good and accomplish nothing. I understand why you thought it was the only way. I understand the logic of it. The sacrifice, the protection, a willing death, the echo of my mother's act. Poetically it makes sense. Practically it doesn't, because the soul fragment can be expelled without the rest of me dying, and the plan that requires my death was built without that information. Dumbledore sat for a long time. The fire burned low. Somewhere distant, the sounds of Hogwarts beginning its Thursday morning drifted through the stone walls. Severus confirmed this, Dumbledore said. Severus confirmed this, Harry said. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were very bright, and Harry thought, for just a moment, that the brightness might be the precursor to something that Albus Dumbledore very rarely permitted himself, but it passed before he could be certain. I have, Dumbledore said, slowly, spent the better part of a year believing that your survival was not, he stopped. Began again. I was planning to love you and sacrifice you. Both things simultaneously, which is not something I am proud of. I know, Harry said. I think you loved my father and sacrificed him too. Not directly. But you knew the war would take him and you didn't, he stopped. He didn't have all the information for that one. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is the correct plan going forward. Dumbledore looked at him. You're extraordinarily forgiving of a man who was planning to. I'm not forgiving you, Harry said. I'm not forgiving you either. I'm just noting that you were wrong about this specific thing, and that the correct thing to do when you're wrong about something is to correct it and move forward, and that's what we're doing. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. You're a great man who makes a specific kind of mistake, which is the mistake of loving people as instruments of a larger purpose rather than as people. You've been doing it your whole life, I think. I'd like it if you tried to stop. Dumbledore was silent for a very long time. I would like that too, he said, finally, and it came from somewhere so genuine that Harry believed it without reservation. Madame Pomfrey brought breakfast at some point during the conversation, tooted at Dumbledore for tiring her patient, and was informed by Harry that he was not tired. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been enforcing medical authority for 30 years and was deciding whether this was a battle worth having, concluded it wasn't, left 2 breakfasts and departed with great professional dignity. They ate. The conversation shifted to the practical, the Horcruxes, the search, what Harry's involvement looked like over the coming years, how much Dumbledore would tell him and when. Everything, Harry said. Tell me everything as you find it. Not when you think I'm ready. Everything. Some things, Dumbledore said, I will need to judge the moment for. I'll accept that if you're honest about why you're judging the moment, Harry said. Not managing. Judging. There's a difference and I need you to know the difference. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was exhausted and fond and genuinely, usefully humbled. I will try, he said, and meant it. Ron and Hermione came at 10 o'clock, Madame Pomfrey trailing them with the slightly outmaneuvered look of a woman who had attempted to limit visiting hours and encountered a resistance she hadn't anticipated. Ron had his arm in a sling, holding it at an angle that suggested he was performing nonchalance about the sling, and Hermione had her bag, because Hermione always had her bag. They stopped when they saw Harry sitting up eating toast, and the specific relief on both their faces was the kind of relief that doesn't perform itself. It just existed, clean and complete, in the drop of Ron's shoulders and the way Hermione's hand found the strap of her bag and stopped moving. "You're fine," Ron said. "I'm fine," Harry said. "Brilliant," Ron said, and came and sat on the edge of the bed with the ease of someone who had decided this was his space and was occupying it. He looked at Harry with his direct, assessing look. "What happened?" "After the chess. We heard," Dumbledore wouldn't say specifically, but there were theories. "Seamus has a theory involving a dragon." "There was no dragon," Hermione said, sitting in the chair Dumbledore had vacated. "There wasn't," Harry confirmed. He looked at them both and thought about how much to tell them, which was the same calculation he always made and which always came out the same way, all of it, because they deserve it and they can handle it. He told them about Quirrell and the chamber and Voldemort's face and the stone and what had happened when the pressure had come. He told them, because they were his and they deserved the whole picture, about the fragment and what it was and the plan for dealing with it. Hermione's pen came out. Ron was very still, doing his people reading thing, not analyzing the information but analyzing Harry, looking for what Harry wasn't saying, which was Ron's specific skill and which Harry had come to genuinely rely on. "You're all right," Ron said. "Actually all right. Not just saying it." "Actually all right," Harry said. "The fragment," Hermione said carefully. "It's still there." "Yes. But contained." He looked at her. "The work we've been doing, the wall, it held. Even when Voldemort hit it full force." He paused. "The plan Snape and I have worked out should deal with it permanently when the time comes. When all the other Horcruxes are gone and Voldemort's destroyed properly." Hermione wrote something. Stopped. Looked up. "This is going to be a long fight," she said. It wasn't a complaint. It was the tone of someone measuring the scope of a commitment. "Yes," Harry said. She met his eyes. "Right," she said, with the tone of Hermione Granger committing to something enormous in 2 letters. "Then we need better resources. I'm going to write to the Hogwarts Library Archive about the Horcrux texts, the complete collection, not just what's in the restricted section. And I want to start on legilimency theory because if Voldemort can access minds, the counter should be, Hermione," Ron said. She stopped. "He just woke up," Ron said. "We can plan tomorrow." Hermione looked at Harry and Harry looked at her and she made the face that was her version of Ron being right when she hadn't planned for Ron to be right. She put her pen away. "Fine," she said. "Tomorrow." Ron produced, from the pocket of his robes, 3 scones wrapped in a napkin. He handed one to Harry and one to Hermione and kept one for himself and they sat in the hospital wing with the white winter light coming through the high windows and ate scones and didn't say anything for a while, and the not saying anything was the most comfortable not saying anything Harry had ever experienced. He thought about the mirror. The open ground, the people, the quality of everyone. He thought about sitting in a hospital bed with his 2 best friends eating scones at 10 in the morning after a night that had included a giant chess game and a direct encounter with the remnants of the world's most feared dark wizard, and he thought, this is it. This is the thing the mirror was showing me. Not the destination. The direction. He was already walking in it. Dumbledore addressed the school at the end of term feast, the night before the students were due to go home for Christmas. The Great Hall was its usual December self, enormous and warm and full of the specific energy of people who were finishing something and looking forward to going home, the decorations more elaborate than Harry had been prepared for, 12 trees and living snow and an atmosphere that pressed against the memory of what had happened under the school 3 days ago with the cheerful insistence of something that didn't know and wouldn't have believed you. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione and ate his dinner and listened to the conversations around him and felt the hall in the specific way he'd been feeling the castle since September, its pulse, its aliveness, the sense of it as a place rather than just a building. Dumbledore rose for his address and the hall quieted, and he said the standard things about a successful first term, about returning safely, about the pleasure it gave him to see the school come together in the spirit of the season, and then he said, "I also want to take a moment to acknowledge something that happened at the beginning of this term, something that has, I believe, added to Hogwarts in ways we are still discovering." The hall went a different kind of quiet. Harry kept eating. "Some of you may be waiting," Dumbledore said, "for an explanation of the events of the sorting. For a categorization, perhaps, of what it means that the Sorting Hat declined, for the first time in its 1,000 years of service, to place a student in a house." He looked across the hall, not specifically at Harry but in his general direction with the easy deliberateness of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm afraid I cannot offer you a category. What I can offer you is a perspective, which is this: Hogwarts was built on the principle that students must be divided in order to learn. That understanding the nature of your own particular gifts requires community with others who share them." He paused. "What the Hat showed us, what Harry Potter has shown us, in 3 months of being simply and entirely himself in this school, is that perhaps there is a kind of person for whom division is not the answer. Not because they are above the houses, but because they encompass something the houses were built to serve, which is the full possibility of what a person can be." He let the silence sit for a moment. "I don't think this needs a category. I think it simply needs a name. And his name is Harry Potter, and he belongs to this school in a way that none of our categories account for, and I find I am glad of it." He sat down. The hall was very still for a moment. Then the Gryffindor table started, and then Ravenclaw, and then Hufflepuff, and then, Harry noticed this, and noted it, and put it somewhere careful, a section of the Slytherin table, not all of it, not even most of it, but some, including Daphne Greengrass, who clapped once, precisely, in the specific way of someone who has decided on something and is doing it consciously. Harry looked at his plate and felt Ron nudge his shoulder from the left and Hermione touch his arm briefly from the right and thought, with a fullness that didn't need to be larger than it was, "All right. Good." The days between the end of term feast and Christmas were quiet. Most of the students had gone home, the castle emptying out until only the few who were staying remained, and the remaining few had the whole enormous place to themselves in the specific way of people who have been given an enormous thing they weren't expecting and are figuring out what to do with it. Ron stayed. He'd written to his mum and she'd approved it, enthusiastically, in a letter that Ron described as emotional and which Hermione said sounded lovely and which Harry found he couldn't read without something going very warm in his chest. Hermione stayed too, ostensibly because she had research to do, actually, Harry thought, because she didn't want to leave, and the leaving had nothing to do with research. They had the Gryffindor common room and the library and the castle corridors and the grounds, and they moved through all of it in the loose, easy way of people without a schedule, and it was the best week Harry could remember, which was true but also set against competition that was not especially stiff. On Christmas morning Harry came down to the East Tower sitting room and found a pile of presents outside his door that was so unexpected he stood in the corridor for a moment just looking at it. He'd given Ron and Hermione gifts, books he'd found in Hogsmeade when Dumbledore had quietly arranged for the 3 of them to visit the village in early December, something for each of them that he'd chosen specifically. He'd expected something back from them. He had not expected a pile. He brought it inside and sat by the fire and opened things. From Ron, a handmade chessboard, the pieces carved by someone in the Weasley family with evident skill, each one unique and slightly characterful, and a note that said figured you could use one that's an appropriate size. From Hermione, 3 books, not textbooks, novels, fantasy literature, with a note that said I know you read theory but sometimes you need the other kind. From Hagrid, a hand-carved flute with a note that made no sense but was extremely well-meaning. From the Weasley family collectively, apparently at Mrs. Weasley's instigation, a hand-knitted sweater in dark green with an H on the front, and a tin of fudge. Harry held the sweater for a moment. It was slightly too big, which was exactly right, and it smelled like a kitchen that made real food, and Mrs. Weasley had knitted it without ever having met him, on the basis of Ron's letters alone, and the specificity of that, the deliberateness of being included in something before you'd earned inclusion, was, of all the things Harry had received in his 11 years, one of the most extraordinary. He put it on. Then there was a small package at the bottom of the pile, wrapped in plain brown paper with no note. He opened it. Inside was a vial of something dark silver, and with it a card with one word in Snape's precise, angular handwriting, progress. Harry turned the vial over. The silver moved like smoke in liquid, like it couldn't decide what state it wanted to be in. He recognized it from his reading, a pensive memory, preserved for later viewing. He'd asked Snape what it contained, when term started. He put it carefully on the bookshelf, next to his library books and his father's invisibility cloak folded at the end and the rock Neville had given him, for reasons that hadn't been entirely clear but that Harry had taken because Neville had given it with complete sincerity. He sat by the fire in his green sweater and listened to the castle's Christmas quiet and thought about the year. He thought about the hat, and the silence that had fallen over the great hall when it spoke. He thought about the East Tower on that first night, the window seat, the dark water below. He thought about Flitwick and flying in Snape's dungeon and Dumbledore's careful eyes, and the mirror showing him an open field and the people in it. He thought about Quirrell's face and the stone in his palm and Voldemort's cold intelligence moving through him without finding purchase and the warmth underneath that had always been there, his mother's warmth, like a fire that was never going to go out. He thought about Ron's chess game and Hermione's pen and the scones and the three of them sitting in the hospital wing saying nothing that needed to be said. He was 11 years old and there was a fragment of the world's most feared dark wizard in his head and 5 other pieces of that wizard scattered through the world and objects he hadn't found yet and a longer fight ahead than he could see the full length of. And he had a broken headmaster who was trying to do better and a potions teacher who was helping him under the table and a castle that kept his doors and an unclassified status in a world that really preferred things classified. He thought about what Dumbledore had said at the feast. He belongs to this school in a way that none of our categories account for. Harry looked out the window at the white December grounds, the lake frozen to its edges now, the sky very clear and very blue in the way of winter skies that have given up their clouds. He thought, more actions AI chat every frontier model and agent, all in your membership, see the list Claude Sonnet 4.